mean? 'Cause
Yeah.
like if you can see those wires, it kind of, it doesn't.
No,
It's more,
that's not what I mean. You cannot sort of
Put it
hang
on
it
a stand.
somewhere so that you don't have to hold it.
Oh, I see what you're
It
saying.
needs to be moved around, or?
It does, it actually does need to
Oh,
be,
okay.
yeah, they, the core. Okay.
We should also say the date. So today is what?
The 20th of August. Is it?
20th, is it?
Yeah,
Yeah,
this
okay,
workshop
so-
was on the 19th.
20th August.
School starts on
11.
the 27th.
We are here.
All right, 5, 4, 3, 2.
Today is August 20th, 2011. We are on the campus of the University of Texas, El Paso, the Cotton Memorial Building, and we are here to have a conversation about liberating structures.
Oh, my name is Helen Wang, and I am visiting from Buffalo, where I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Communication, and I learned about liberating structures in November 2010, and started trying out in my classes earlier this year, and so I think I can consider myself as a liberating structure enthusiast.
My name is Henry Lipmanovich. I have been assembling and developing the application of liberating structures for a number of years together with a friend of mine, Keith McCandless, and I am here on campus because I was facilitating a workshop on liberating structure for, what was it, 150 professors on campus.
I'm Arvind Singhal. I'm based here in the Department of Communication at the University of Texas, El Paso. I have a big interest in teaching, learning methodologies from the perspective, of course, using them in classrooms and beyond. As also, I have a research interest, naturally, given that these are mechanisms by way of which people communicate and relate differently to each other, and that has a bearing on outcomes. So I bring my teaching and my research side to our conversation about liberating structures.
I am Lucia Duran, and I work at the English department at the University of Texas, El Paso. And I have been experiencing liberating structures at several meetings that I've attended, both at conferences and at work meetings. And I am very interested in the application of liberating structures in the classroom, as well as the research of liberating structures in the classroom, and beyond within an academic setting, such as in department meetings and committee meetings.
Cool. Good. Now that we've done our introductions, we can have a free-flowing conversation about liberating structures. We can feel free to jump in, and hopefully this conversation, as it evolves, will be of some use to us and perhaps to others as well. So where should we begin? Maybe we should begin by posing the question, what are liberating structures? Henry, what are liberating structures?
Well, they are structures.
That liberate.
Exactly. You got it. And so they are a collection of, we have now, I think Keith and I have somewhere in the range of about 35 different methods that are changes in structures that one can make when one is working with a group of people, whether it is in a classroom or in a work environment, to change how they interact with each other. So And the objective is to make that group much more effective. And the first step in accomplishing that is to include the participation of everybody in whatever is being done. So to reduce or eliminate the amount of time that is spent with one person occupying the whole space and all the others being quiet, and change it into situations where everybody is actively engaged in whatever is the task that is going on in that group.
Now, Henry, as insiders to the profession of academia and being based in a university setting, I might say, or some may say, what's so good about having so many conversations at one time in a classroom, and when I'm the professor, I'm the lecturer, you should just take it from me.
Well, maybe. In that case, I think the students don't have to bother coming to the classroom. You can just send them the videotape. If nothing is going to happen in the classroom, they're just going to sit there and listen to you. Why? What's the point?
But then they can ask questions, and I can
now
answer them
question
interactively.
means interaction.
Mm-hmm. But that sort of naturally happens, so why would I worry about bringing in another structure when, you know, I lecture and I say any questions, and if they have any questions, they raise their hand, we get
So
into little groups.
So the value that comes out of this classroom comes from what? What is the added value versus watching the videotape?
You know, my presence, my persona, or Helen's presence
When
and
you're-
persona.
You mean when you are delivering your lecture?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So there's,
Connecting with people, looking at them, watching their responses. If somebody's sleeping, you know, I can say, hey, you.
And students have the opportunity to learn from each other's questions, or
Oh,
the
so-
questions that others ask.
I'm getting very confused by this because what are we talking about? Your lecture or the question and discussion and connection and that kind of thing?
We are saying a typical classroom situation includes not just a lecture.
Mhm.
A typical classroom situation includes a lecture,
But what's the value of the lecture?
you know, imparting information, adding insights to the readings that students may have done.
But why do they have to be there for that? Why can't you send them the videotape? And so they can come and you can spend the whole time on connecting, interacting, answering questions, discussing, solving problems or addressing issues and so on, being, you know, engaged. I mean, what is the benefit of them having to sit on their butt listening to you?
They look very engaged, Henry.
Oh, I see.
So if
Behind their computer screens, you mean?
no, I usually ask them to be fully present by not having their iPhones or their computer screens. So I guess what I'm getting
And
at,
you know precisely what's going on in their heads while you are delivering your lecture.
no, but you know, you have, they don't know what's going on in my head as I'm delivering my lectures.
Delivering a lecture is not interactive.
But delivering a lecture and having a space for, I have a question, what do you think? Rita said this, Helen said this.
But what is the value of using the time for the lecture? All the time you use for the lecture means you have taken time away from the question, the discussion, the conversation, the interaction. What's the purpose of the lecture
So, okay.
in the classroom?
So then, Henry, tell us, if we go with that line of thinking, why should a professor who's set in his ways of doing things, who knows exactly how to create what they believe is an engaging classroom, and there are students who say you are a phenomenal instructor. You keep us engaged, you have great stories to tell, you explain the material in a phenomenal way. What would you say to that professor with respect to liberating structures?
What I would say to that professor is the same thing, that the classroom is a privileged space where a group of people is together face to face. And that time should be used for taking advantage of that physical presence, to do the things that you can only do when you are together in the same room, to create the kind of interactions that can only take place in that sort of setting. And anything that you can do that doesn't require that, should be done in some other way, so that you don't use up that precious time and precious space when you're all together, physically. So if so what I'm saying, if you're just going to read a lecture, well, 100 years ago, people may have had to come, to listen to the lecture because there was no other way of communicating. But today, it makes no sense. It's a waste of time. And, if people have questions and things, they can bring them, or they can be generated in their conversation, and then all the time and spend with people really engaged. Because the only way you know that a student is engaged is when he's physically engaged, when there is action. When he's sitting, you don't know what is going on. It is, it's hidden. And whether they're engaged or not is anybody's guess. You don't even know if they're listening. You don't know where their mind is, And so that's one thing. And the other thing is that learning is a social process. You learn when you do something. You don't really learn by listening. You learn by taking in something and then doing something with it, either solving a problem or conversing or debating or discussing or, turning it around, kicking it around and so forth, and hearing what other people think. That's learning, And so, lectures are needed. The question is where? At what time do you do it? And if you're thinking about the fact that, in a typical setting, I think, class is 1.5 hours, maybe twice a week. That's 3 hours a week. That's the most precious time. It shouldn't be wasted. That's my view, and
So in essence, what you're saying, Henry, as we grasp our heads around what liberating structures are, is that here are some techniques, some tools which are typically not practiced. They clearly are not reflected fully in lecturing or in Q&A or in group work that we do in classrooms. But these are some special little things which one can do which enhances the presence and the interactive presence of individuals and I guess the student participants. So what would be an example of a liberating structure in a classroom setting?
Well, since we were talking about this notion of bringing the lecture in or out of the classroom, and since it is clear that one of the essential role of a professor is to clarify, to answer questions. One of the simple liberating structure, we call it 1 to 4, that could generate this would be, if material has been sent in advance to the students, they come in, and the first thing could be, for instance, to give everybody a chance to think about the questions that they have about the lecture they have just listened to the day before, maybe, or the night before, and then share those together with one of their colleagues, and then discuss it, a minute or two, and then a couple of more minutes in a small group of 4 to really collect the question, answer them, and maybe get rid of a lot of questions, because the question I have may not, somebody else may have the answer, so it doesn't necessarily need to come up to the level of the professor. So there would be work being done at that level for a few minutes, And then you start harvesting those, you know, as the professor, and say, okay, you have a dozen groups maybe, a dozen small groups. Okay, what questions, you know, one question that came up in your group that you would like us to address? And then you know, you would facilitate that first, instead of just you answering, maybe throw the question to the rest of the class. So any comments on this? Anybody, any thoughts? What, you know, well, how would you answer that question? And then when you have to, you jump in as the professor, you know, and you say, okay, here's what I think is, you know, or here's a story, or here's a situation, or here's whatever it is, depending on the subject that you're dealing with. And so by doing this, what you have done is you have first of all invited everybody to be present immediately when they come in the room, you know, with their questions, their issues, the things that are important to them.
And their
you know.
contributions too, if they have something
And
to
their
offer.
contribution in the next step when they talk with somebody else. Yeah. Okay. So you have created a very much more energized kind of thing, because you have given everybody the chance to ask their question. Whereas if you are delivering a lecture and you have, you know, 20 or 30 people listening to you, and then you say, are there any questions? You know, well, you'll get some questions. But how many questions will never be asked? Because they will stay in the heads of the student, either because he or she's shy, or because,
Scared.
well, I'm scared, or what
Or
I
they'll
look
be
like.
embarrassed,
Or
you know, if
any-
you ask a stupid question
Yeah.
in front of the entire class.
Exactly. I mean, whatever. So by doing this, you have created a lot of little safe spaces, you know, for this to come out.
And also,
So-
I think I like this perspective of diversity, right? It's not just I having a conversation with a professor, but also I can also see the perspectives from many others through this process. So, you know, they may have questions that I don't have, or they may have an answer that I don't have. So you can understand the same concept, or the same subject matter from a variety of perspectives through this process. So yes, it is interactive that I can have this Q&A with the professor, which is good. But you know, it's a shortcut. It's like from here and to there. But I think you get a much richer kind of understanding through this process of liberating structure.
And to me, what's interesting about this conversation is not only the notion of a toolbox, something that I can deploy at certain times for more meaningful, more fun, engaged, enriched, productive interaction, but also what I'm hearing is that there's this awareness of design for when to use the lecture versus when to have people working in pairs or having them in fours, or maybe a more complex way of interacting. But there's what jumps at me is the idea of being aware of the right design for the right moment.
So one way of designing a class, the conventional way, is I come in, I deliver a lecture, I ask if there are any questions, you know, you facilitate a little interaction, some sharing of ideas or opinions. But what you're saying is, if we employed, for instance, the 1, 2, 4 liberating structure, you're providing opportunity for an individual right off the bat to come to a state of consciousness, which is prompted by the teacher perhaps saying, you have read some materials, you have seen a few things, what questions do you have based on readings, based on where we are at this time? And once you reflect on that, that's the one, you then share it with another.
Yeah.
And which means it's co-sharing. You share it and the other person shares with you.
And there's some comment and
Conversation.
something happens.
Yeah.
Something may happen,
Yeah.
or maybe not. Yeah.
And then these two people talk to another two, which makes a 4. And then you have multiple conversations happening there. So in many ways, what you're saying is a little structure such as this, which may take a few minutes, a minute for the 1 and a few minutes for the 2 and a few more minutes for the 4, provides an iterative, sifting, yet evolving of ideas, questions, and for an opportunity for those to be shared and resolved at these multiple levels before they come on to the level of the entire class. And what emerges from these different groups then provides the basis to move forward.
Yeah, and it generates a whole lot of things. It reveals, what the difference that it makes to start with is that all the stuff that would have just been there, that
Right.
nobody would have ever heard of or seen,
Right.
has a much greater chance to come to the surface. So instead of, it's to stay with this question thing, instead of just 2 or 3 questions, you are likely to end up with, 40 or 50 or 100 different questions, maybe not, but, that come up from, because everybody has to say, my question is my question is my question. So that's one. The other thing that is big, in my opinion, is that you're creating a milieu, you're creating a community when you do that. You're creating the opportunity for those students to learn from each other, to get to know each other better, to connect with each other, to build trust, with each other, because they are, interacting like this frequently and sharing questions or problem or issues or whatever and so forth, and discovering, what they can get from each other, so that you're now enriched your capacity. So your classroom is not anymore just a place where they learn from you. It's a classroom where they learn from you plus everybody else that is in the room. Okay? And so you've multiplied, the power, if you want, of your.
I
of your
think of
classroom.
this as a process of optimization, right? It's not that we're not having group activities or discussions in our classrooms, but it's how we could best use our face-to-face time together
Exactly.
to get the the maximum learning experience out of it. So compared to a few Q&As between 2, 3, 4 people, or even within small groups that we typically do in seminars, you would have a discussion, but only with maybe a couple more people, versus everybody would have brought up their thoughts and questions and worked with each other, and then with the rest of the class, including the professor, that you could, with pretty short amount of time, and have this very engaged process of learning that I think it really leads to deeper level rather than just a regular conversation.
I don't know if it's a good one, but when we were having dinner yesterday, I don't know if you remember, I was using the metaphor of comparing liberating structure to simple tools that we are using in our everyday life, like a hammer and a pair of pliers and a screwdriver and so forth. And what physical tools, and we're used to them and we don't even think about it, are there to enhance what we can do with our hands alone. So you can do much more by using a tool, or much faster, or much more effectively, or you can do things that you cannot do with your hands alone because you don't have enough strength, or enough dexterity. And this is the same thing, Those are things that make it possible for you to accomplish much more than what you could do with just your own talent, okay? And so, in a sense, it is, if you want, it is creating the opportunity for every professor to become charismatic, to become a super professor, because it doesn't have to be just him or her, it is him or her and her plus a bunch of tools plus all the students, and so now you have created something that's much more powerful than just one person. And if you think of things that happen all the time when you have a group in a classroom or in a meeting or whatever, you're talking about questions. And we were visiting a classroom just a couple of days ago, all of us, and we saw that happen. At some point, there were like 70 people in that room, right, or 80. And at some point, somebody asked a question, and the professor goes to that person and there is 1 minute or two that, interaction between those two. Okay? And there's 79 other people, or maybe not 79, maybe there are some of them for whom that particular question was relevant,
Right.
and all the others are off. Okay?
Yeah.
So this is, and that's structure. This is not content. This is not how good is the professor, how talented, how much he knows about his or her subject or that. You know, that's not it. This is structure. Yeah.
So Henry, what I'm hearing as I wrap my head around liberating structures from the base position that I had, you're saying that by introducing a simple structure like a 1, 2, 4, which takes a few minutes, you are providing an opportunity for multiple conversations to happen at the same time, which also then is a measure, if you may, of their engagement
Yeah.
in the here and the now.
Yeah.
So it's not engagement in terms of I'm listening to you and I'm engaged,
I'm
but
active.
I'm actively listening and I'm actively contributing to the conversation. So basically what one is doing is you're opening a box of teachers and learners through the multiple conversations that are unleashed by this very simple structure.
Exactly. And you're promoting a big amount of self-discovery that takes place, you know, horizontally, with people discussing with each other and figuring out
Yeah.
possibly the answer to this question, or discovering themselves, you know, the answer to that question. Now, this is one structure. There are many other that are, you know, that are more designed to achieve particular purposes, you know. But there's a lot of that going on, a lot of self-discovery, you know, instead of, you know, give me the answer.
And
Yeah.
give me the answer that you think would be the best answer.
We
And-
professors like that.
Yeah.
And the burden is distributed.
Right,
So
exactly.
instead of carrying a huge cake, we're all kind of carrying a cupcake.
For
Or
me,
you-
you know,
That's what
I'm not a professor. I have, you know, I had a business career for 30 years. And so the groups of people that I was dealing with were people that were working together. You know, they were trying to accomplish something together in meetings or in projects or whatever. And so it's a bit of a different environment. But what I take from there, which I believe is applicable to the classroom and even more so, is that anything that you do in terms of the way people interact, that will improve the quality of the relationships in that group makes a difference to the outcome. And I think classrooms are totally underutilized as an opportunity in that respect. I think much more could be done to really build the connections in the community among the students so that they would be in a supportive environment. You know, there's a lot of classes where I think students come, they hardly talk to each other. If they talk to someone, it's just one or two buddies, you know, they don't know each other, they don't know, you know, and so they are deprived of the access and the opportunity of what it is that they could get from all those other people, because it's not designed for them to interact. It's designed for them to sit there and spend a lot of time, you know, listening to one PowerPoint, another PowerPoint.
So this is what you meant, the notion that when people come, and you come for, let's say, 16 weeks, twice a week, for an hour and a half each, and you're physically present in a classroom, you have an opportunity to develop relationships with others of trust, improve the quality of the relationship in terms of what you could learn from them, and that is the value. That is the added value of being in a classroom, which is not possible if you look at my PowerPoint virtually, or if you look at my,
Yeah.
Okay, now that makes sense.
Well, and the other thing is that this value goes beyond the subject in the classroom.
Right.
Because if they do that
The
in the
relation-
classroom, they're learning things that will help them later that have nothing to do with the subject.
They are
that are-
learning to learn.
They're learning
Right.
to learn, and
Yeah.
they're learning to work together. They're
Right.
learning to cooperate. They're learning to help each other. They're learning to ask for help.
Yeah.
I mean, they're learning all kinds of things that are nothing to do with the subject itself.
And it's
Which-
going into their muscle memory. So
Exactly.
they're
Exactly.
enacting.
So, Henry, why aren't, I mean, if this is, so good, if this is something that enthuses you so much, why aren't we doing this more?
Why isn't everybody doing it, you mean?
Yeah, I mean, if the cake is so good, why aren't people lining up? I mean, we're not, academia is all about cutting edge. We have a Department of Education and, there are very smart people in
Well-
business who do this and that.
Well, first of all, I think, the first reason is people don't know.
Huh.
You don't learn this, It is not, I spent 30 years, I went very high up, in a corporation, in one of the big corporations in this country, one of probably
The world?
in the world, and, with very talented people. That wasn't there. That's not the way you work, You don't learn that. It's not a practice. And so the practice that are in places are practices that we carry from history, they are top down.
Learn it from me, I'm the expert, I've earned my PhD.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
is, but it's the same, we grew up that way, in many families. This is, I'm the father, I make the decisions.
Oh, yeah.
Or I'm the mother, I make the decisions.
Mhm.
And you little kid.
You better
shut up.
listen.
Yeah,
Yeah.
better listen, I'll tell you what the right. And it goes on with school.
Mhm.
You go to school and there's a teacher and it's top down. And so the way we've organized things is very much top down machine-like,
Hmm.
And controlled.
and
constrained.
control, It's, so it's a few people make the decision and tell the others. Yeah.
Mhm.
But
And,
you're saying the structures we have been, I guess, programmed to is to take orders and,
Mhm.
and
And,
conform.
and so we don't, I think this is changing, little by little, but people don't learn. And what's interesting is that even those who want that, who wish that, who have those values, who say, I want my people to be engaged, and you hear that word all over,
Yeah.
don't know how to do it.
Yeah.
They have not learned to do it. And so if you don't know how to do something, you don't do it,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
it's that simple.
So, why don't people know how to do this? I mean, isn't there a book that they could read? Aren't there people
We're-
making a lot of money?
We're trying to write one.
Provide, to.
I don't know about the making a lot of money, but that's not the idea behind it. Actually, as you know, Keith and I have been working with this now for, my God, it's going to approach 10 years developing this, and we are finally, after enough people beating up on us and say, when are you going to, we are starting to assemble the material to put together something that would be, at least a user manual, and hopefully more than that, But it just, there's the weight of tradition is incredibly heavy, and the way structure do not, when we're talking about structure here, because when we're talking about this little example, this is nothing to do with changing anything fundamental. The structures are fixed. They carry for generations. And so you go into a meeting in a company, it's the same thing as probably in school. You go into a classroom, and it's always the same. It's been like this for years. It's the same for, in each professor as their habit, and this is the way it is. So each meeting is the same. You go in, okay, what's the first topic on the agenda?
Right.
Okay, who is it? You, okay. Stand up, PowerPoint presentation, okay, so discussion, question, okay, done, decided, agree, everybody, fine, next
Right.
topic, and so forth.
How do these?
That's the way.
how do the physical structures and spaces contribute to, you know, propagating meetings that are the same?
Well, the
Gathered
physical
space.
space is part of the story. You know, you walk into the management meeting room, and you have you U-shaped table, or you know, boardroom, a big table, projected one end, you know, and you know, everybody is separated. You know,
And the CEO sits in a certain
the
place,
sits are always
Yeah.
in the same place,
Right.
You know, at the
right?
bottom of the U, and who sits next to him is always the same, and so forth.
Right.
And it's, you know, it's like a play, kabuki, you know. It's, you know.
Yeah,
Or in the classroom, you have the podium versus rows of chairs.
Mhm.
yeah.
So I think sometimes we think in terms of design that we can't redesign because things are, in some cases, they are bolted down.
Yeah, and you
but
really,
they have a heavy presence
Yeah.
in a physical
and
room.
there are, I mean, I've been in enough meeting rooms and in enough places where we're trying to do something where you can't. You have to move out of the room and go somewhere else, or you have to move the furniture, you know, or stack it against the wall, because you can't. The space is not designed for people to talk to each other, to interact with each
Yeah.
other. You know, I remember walking not so long ago in a meeting room, and you know, everybody was already there, you know, and the lights had been sort of dimmed a bit, and everybody was sitting. It was one of those, so there was a huge table going, you know, all around the room, and all the computers were open, and everybody was looking at their computer. And I walked in there, and my reaction was, this room has been designed for computers. The most important thing in this room is the table and the computers and the wires. The people are sort of incidental.
Not for communication,
Yeah.
interaction.
So one way
So
of
you're
yeah.
absolutely right.
So one way of looking at structures or liberating structures is to think of them as, you know, you have the same people who are participating. You have the same resources, you know, in terms of a space.
Yeah.
But what you are doing is a little something with perhaps space, a little something with the structures which may fuel interaction, the one, the two, the four, the whole, so that the quality of the outcomes perhaps are very, very different.
They're very different. Yeah.
How are they different?
Well, the outcome is different. The main thing, if you want one single sentence as an answer, the main thing is the outcome now reflects the input of everybody that was there. Because everybody has been included in the conversation, as opposed to an outcome that reflects either the one person or two or three. Yeah.
It must be very messy.
Yes, it is, but it's fun, and that's one of the reasons why, you know, I become so convinced about the utility of this thing, is because I have never, in all these years, I've never had one instance where people were not enjoying it and smiling and say, "Well, this is great," and sort of, you know, and really, you know, it really fulfills a need that is fundamentally present in all of us, which is that we want to be present. We want to do something meaningful. We want to be engaged. We don't want to be sitting like this.
We want to be heard.
We want to be heard. We want to be listened to. And if we have questions and problems, we want them to be addressed, you know. And so that is, I think, you know, in a short way, what generates automatically different outcomes. So even when you use some of those liberating structure, even if you don't do it well,
Yeah.
just the fact that you have included everybody is guaranteed to generate a different outcome compared to what you would have done otherwise, you know, with a presentation and some question, or with a lecture and some questions, or, you know.
I can see why it's called liberating structures.
Yeah.
It can be so empowering to invite everyone, you know. to be part of this process.
And it liberates the CEO at some
Yeah,
level. It liberates
absolutely.
the teacher at another level, because
Yes.
it's distributed wisdom and it's
Yeah.
distributed leadership,
Provided
provided.
one is willing to let go of.
But that's
Control.
very hard, Henry.
It is, and that's the question we started with this week. Can change happen, let's say, in learning or in a workspace without chaos? And what do we do with this chaos? We have outcomes, but this process is like,
Well, the chaos is there. The only choice you have is, are you going to
Let
keep it
it,
hidden?
yeah.
ignore it.
Or are you going to allow it to emerge? Because the chaos is hidden there. So if I'm learning something, there is chaos in there. If I'm trying to go from doing things this way, like we were talking about tennis the other day, about, trying to
Changing your swing.
changing the swing, changing the way your grip or something like that, you're gonna have chaos, okay? So learning is a chaotic process because it gets you from some place of knowledge to some other place, and in between there is sort of, how do I get there kind of thing, okay? So it is there, no choice. The difference is, do you want to see it or don't you want to see it? Are you going to get better results, better learning, better outcome if it comes out to the surface and it can be talked about, addressed, dealt with, or, the other way? So that's one thing. And, if you reveal it, it gets,
Makes people uncomfortable.
it can be
Yeah.
rather uncomfortable, because you sort of, where are we going? Is this going to work?
I can
Okay.
definitely
And,
relate to that.
yeah, and so you have to trust the people and the process, and let go, and say whatever happens is whatever happens, and it is not really changing the reality of what was there, okay? And so accept that thing. So that is not necessarily pleasant, because if you, again, I'm more familiar with the business environment. In a meeting, if you open things up,
Yeah.
people will start bringing things that are going to, the management is not going to be very happy. They don't,
Yeah.
this is not what we want them to talk about. Well, it may not be what you want them to talk about, but this is what's important to them.
Right.
So what do you prefer?
Yeah.
To know about it and be able to do something about it, talk about it, or do you prefer to sort of, it stays in the corridor, and people
Right.
are moaning and bitching and complaining all the time.
Right.
And so,
Yeah.
so
But, Henry, I don't know why I'm saying a but
I think Helen can speak to
Yeah,
the point that I wanted to make is even though it's messy, and even though it can create the conditions whereby which stuff comes up, which otherwise, the moaning, the bitching that happens in the corridors, but the structures are such, or could be designed in a way that they create a room of safety, a space of safety, whereby which what comes up in a way that
safety for whom?
safety for the ones who are bringing up the muck.
Oh, that yes, but the one that fears the chaos the most is either the boss
Right.
or the professor or the one who is in charge of whatever that event is.
Right.
That's the one that is,
Yeah.
oh,
I mean, this is a very different process, right? It's not like everything you're in control all the time. This is, you really have to be willing to open to almost like a co-discovery journey. And through the process, something's gonna emerge. But you wouldn't know in advance what would be the result, right? So you have to be willing to have some courage and to work with, really have the trust in the people you're working with, and to build from there. And I have to say, it's easy for one person, whoever that would be, to take the first step. But especially in the beginning of the journey, the people you're working with, they might also experience some kind of,
Mhm.
you know,
Yeah, because the
anxiety,
expectations are on
dealing
both
with
sides.
uncertainty,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And especially if they're so used to a different process.
Mhm.
So let me flip the question. So one way in which liberating structures can be implemented is if a boss, if a teacher, if somebody who's in control, who works with people, finds a way to create mechanisms and processes whereby which there's engagement and there's collective wisdom. What about a student who doesn't control how a classroom is set up, how a syllabus is designed, how a professor comes and takes charge of class time? Are there things which they may be able to do to influence the design of the class? Or is this always left to the one who's going to face the consequences of messiness?
Well, I happen to think yes, and I don't know necessarily how easy it would be and what people can do, but there is, we were talking yesterday about the 15%.
Yes.
And I think that one student alone is one thing, 2 students is another, 3 is another. And I think that if you really have some people that determine and are prepared to exercise their freedom, either by engaging their professor in some conversations and maybe setting up, offering to do something or proposing something and starting with some little step and some experiment, could we try to do this and see what happens and so forth, and engaging some of their buddies in the exercise, and I think things can happen, because I believe that, let's take a scenario, for instance, okay, which I have seen, again, more in the workplace. But could this happen in a university? I don't know. I think so. I think it is possible. Meaning by that it is technically possible. It is feasible. It does require people to do something. So whether there is that kind of energy and willingness to do it, that's the question I have no idea about. So if you ask the question of feasibility, no question. If you ask the question, would people be prepared to do that? Will students bother or say, basta? That's.
Sure.
But what certainly I've seen more in a work environment is, and there was one instance, for instance, in a country, where the managing director was transferred to some other job, and a new one came in, and they had been using liberating structures, quite regularly and at the management level and all the way down, And when that new person came in, I remember talking to him. He said, "They didn't give me a choice. This is the way we work here,
And we find it to be productive.
And it works, and we're going to continue, and so you better come on board." So I think that if you take a scenario, for instance, let's assume that there is some professor who is really into this, okay, and use a number of those methods, in their classroom, and you have a bunch of people that love it. The students say, "This is great."
Right.
Well, is it possible that some of them will start trying to bring this and to seed something in some other class? I don't know. You are the professor. I am,
with a little coaching, with a little, And the reason why I sort of pose this question is because teachers typically find themselves in familiar classrooms. I teach this at a certain time. A student during a 4-year tenure, or a 6-year if you're a graduate student, you find yourself in not just multiple classrooms, but in multiple
Subjects
multiple
also. Yeah.
subjects and settings. And it's one thing to think about introducing liberating structures to, let's say, those who are in a position to control the classroom environment, the teachers. But if one can strategically think about creating an atmosphere so that their class, where students are in practice of these liberating structures, then are challenged, coached, encouraged,
Yeah.
to perhaps see if they could seed other environments in which they work.
Yeah.
Then it has the qualities of becoming a movement.
Yeah, I mean, I can think of any number of things that could be done in order to really promote this inside of a university. There's no question about that. I think the question is more, is there the willingness and the energy to invest in that in order to create the experiences so that people learn how to do it, because it is, it's like, it is entirely feasible for one important reason, is that many of them, if not all of them, are very simple. So it doesn't take, you don't have to go and get a black belt. You don't have to spend 3 weeks or 3 months somewhere in order to become an expert.
To learn how to hammer a nail.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It is that kind of a thing. You may not be excellent, but you're good enough to use it very quickly. Okay? And so I think the rest of it is really an investment. Is a group? Is there a willingness to invest in learning and trying out a certain number of those things and learning? I just talk about learning, so that one is able after that to have a conversation about, okay, now we've learned, we have tried those things, we know what they are, now what are we going to do with it? Do we use them? How much do we use it? How do we use them? And so forth. Because the usage is like tools,
Right.
A plumber uses certain of them for certain things in certain way. A roofer will do something else, and a carpenter will do something else, etc. Even though a lot of the tools are exactly the same. So the application is really very much a function of the person. What do I like? And then the task. What do I do? What's my subject? What am I trying to accomplish in this half an hour or in the next half an hour? And it's like it's a Lego thing. You're using one for this and another one for something, etc. And put them together. So I think that is entirely feasible. What is that? What is needed is, the desire to do it. The willing. I mean, there's all kinds of things going on campus. So it's not like there's nothing going on.
My experience, I just feel like the change in the mindset and the change in the practice, they go hand in hand, right? It's one thing that it's simple enough for people to be willing, I think, to try them out, even if it's just one activity, and you can feel the difference it's making. And then to go from there, and then once you've done it and you improve your understanding of how that works. And also another thing I felt was very important and helpful was to not do it by yourself, but do it with a partner or a few others as a community of support, so you're not feeling like you're taking high risk and doing it all alone.
And Helen, I'm curious about your experience, about the students' awareness of what they were doing. At what point did they say, what is this that we're doing? Did they ask you, does this,
Right.
did they say, oh, we're doing that structure again at some point? I'm curious.
It's interesting you're asking
their
this.
perspective.
I started off by actually introducing liberating structures to my students, but acting your way into a new way of thinking. I started off with the speed networking, and we tried the debriefing, and then so we actually worked out the structure of the syllabus together, all of us together, which I'm really proud of. But of course, in the beginning, the first, let's say about 3 or 4 weeks, about 3 weeks, the students are like, yeah, this class is very different, right? The approach, and you come in, you don't sit in this same
There's the
chair
syllabus. Yeah.
every time, and you have to stand up and you have to do something. You're always focused. You're always in that moment, and sort of communicating, trying to understand and convey your ideas with this person in front of you or the group you're working with. But at the same time, it's very novel in the sense that it's a whole different approach when you're in this space, which is a pretty intriguing experience for a lot of students. Then they go back to another class. It's like, yeah, right? But it's also different enough for them to feel like they're so used to lectures, exams, that what are we really doing here? So I felt certain repetition, like, you get a taste of the one-time experience. It's very different from repeating it a few times, so you know how that works, and you become more conscious about how that works and what you can get out of it, and you realize, I can learn from the professor, but I can also offer something I know to my peers, and I learn from them too, and they really feel like they're engaged now. But at some point, you can keep doing the same thing. Then, I had my students suggesting, hey, professor, maybe we could try, this. So once they get to know a few of them, they would make suggestions like, for this part of the, the class, the topic, maybe acting it out, doing some improv kind of thing would be very useful. It's really fun. It's really fun. I can see the sparks in their eyes, and I feel that's just the precious, prize as a teacher.
I'm at the change tapes, guys, so just give me 1 second.
And can I hold this for you while you... Where will we pick up the threads? Helen, you were going somewhere. You were going rather well, wherever you were going.
She was talking, I don't know, she talked about her experiences, and maybe we could do the story.
I think that's good. But here's a question, D'Angelo.
Yes, sir.
Helen will be telling some compelling stories. And right now, of course, you've got the full shot. Is it possible for your second camera to come there? Or do you...
Or I need to turn.
Or
you could just
turn a bit.
in,
Okay. Because I think that'll make for a better story telling.
Yes, ma'am. And could you
Then
turn
now
this
I'm not
as
talking to you guys anymore.
Well, you can do it in your head.
Yeah, yeah, but
well? Yes, you could turn to react, but you mostly tell your story to this.
Yeah, because again, otherwise we get your story, but we get it from the side. And it has, then you're talking to us,
Yes.
but you're not talking to who's watching.
Shoulder to shoulder.
You get the idea?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Trying to
So,
collect my thoughts.
you tell us 5-4.
If you feel uncomfortable talking to the camera, you can talk to the person. I still got, as long as I
As
get
in,
shot
like,
in the face.
I'm talking to you, or...
Yes, ma'am.
Or Steve.
Ooh.
Just be like,
So this side of my face.
So we're gonna start with left front.
But are you gonna ask me questions so
Yeah,
I can...
we'll ask you a
okay.
question. So just tell us when.
Okay. Well, the camera's rolling, guys, and we can start. You guys ready?
Yes.
We can start in 5, 4, 3, 2.
So can we chat a little first,
Yeah, we can.
so that she can warm up?
Yeah. So will we be asking Helen to share a few stories?
I think so. I think that I would like to know if you have any stories, specific stories about your experience with liberating structures in the classroom.
And also, because you are in a very special position, Helen, there are very few faculty members in any institution who have ever tried this. And you were gutsy to try it in the first 2 courses that you taught, a graduate and an undergraduate class.
That's right.
You had the benefit of a coach, a voluntary coach in Henry. But I think it'd be very useful for all of us to hear about, an incident or two, or a story or two, which embodies your experiences with respect to liberating structures.
So I'm going to say something before Helen to make a point about the first step,
Okay.
Which is important. And you may recall that least one liberated structure is really aimed at providing material for what we call creative destruction. You know, and creative destruction is really making space for new growth, for new ideas, for new projects, and taking some of the dead wood out of what is going on, or some of the, you know. And so, you know, going back to the beginning of the conversation that we were talking about lecturing and all this
Right.
kind of thing. A starting point that was critical before even doing anything was the willingness to make the decision to make space. Yeah. And the way, if you're a professor, the way you make space is by deciding, I will not lecture, or I will lecture only very little, or only when, you know. And now you have the space. Because if you come into this classroom and you're the professor and you have 1.5 hours and you don't have a lecture to give, well, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? How are you going to use this
Play together.
time? You know?
And learn from each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's an important thing. Without that kind of, call it creative destruction, without that, you know, willingness to make space, you're stuck. Yeah. And that is true whether you are in a work environment, in a business, or whatever organization it is. You have to be willing to put something aside, you know, to do something new. And this is new, so you have to put something aside. Time is not elastic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Henry, before we have Helen talk about her creative destruction processes, is there a title, is there a name for the liberating structure that deals with creative
Yes.
destruction? And I wonder if you could just take this opportunity to maybe say a little about it.
Yeah, there is one. I don't know if you have used it or not. I don't remember who was. But there's a wonderfully entertaining, actually, liberating structure which we call TRIZ.
TRIZ.
It's an acronym. I don't want to go into what it is an acronym of. It's TRIZ. So, and what it consists of is of doing the opposite of what we normally do. And so, if you have something that you want to accomplish that is important, TRIZ asks you to think about doing exactly the opposite. So, what is it that I can do? If, for instance, you know, you have an important objective and say you want your students to be engaged, okay? Right. So, I, Arvin, want to engage my students. Well, you would then ask the question, you know, what is it that I have to do to make sure that none of my students is engaged for a single minute during this next
Just the
classroom?
opposite.
Okay, you take the opposite. Okay. What do I have to do? Now, normally this is an exercise you do. You can do it for yourself. Normally you do that with a group about a common project or something important that this group is trying to accomplish. So you ask the question, what is it that I have to do to fail, to absolutely make sure that I will fail? And, you know, working in small group, develop all the possible ideas and so forth, and usually this is quite fun. And we tell people, go wild, you know, think of the most crazy thing that you can do that will make sure this will be a disaster. Okay?
Yeah.
And, you know, and you can tell whether this is working because you hear people laughing hysterically, you know, and
Right.
then you know that they are, you know, they're collecting really great stuff. Okay? And so you do that for, you know, in small group for 10 minutes, and then you collect some of those ideas, you know. And then you tell people, okay, now, you know, make the list of this in your group, and you have heard what came out of some of those other groups that you like, put that on your list. And, you know, so this is the first 10 minutes maybe. And the next 10 minutes you ask them, okay, now, look at each one of those things and ask a simple question. Is there anything that we are now doing, or that I am now doing, or that I'm thinking of doing, or that we're thinking of doing, that in any way, shape, or form resembles this thing. Yeah?
Okay.
That looks
Mhm.
like it at all.
Mhm.
And you go one at a time.
Mhm.
And the purpose, of course, is to identify things that you're doing now
Which are
that are actually contributing to failure, to
Right.
the opposite of what you're trying to accomplish. Okay? And once you have done that, you have identified a certain number of things. And then now you can go to work and take each one of them at a time and say, okay, now what are we going to do to
Yeah.
stop this?
Right.
Or to change it dramatically, or to,
Right.
you know,
Mhm.
creatively destroy it. Okay?
Mhm.
So it's a very sort of simple, effective, and again, it's a structure. You know,
Yeah.
the content is provided by the participant.
Right.
The method, the liberating structure, is just structure.
Right.
And the structure is the small group, 10 minutes, here's the question, you know, share,
Mhm.
etc. You know, and
Mhm.
so that's the thing. So in your case, for
Mhm.
instance, you know, one way to make sure that none of the students are engaged is to start your lecture when you walk in and to finish it when you walk out.
Yeah. Mhm.
That's
Mhm.
one of the ways. I'm
Yep.
sure there are others.
Mhm.
Okay.
Have boring slides of text after text, which I read as a teleprompter,
Mhm.
and that's a sure way of. Mhm. So Helen, over to you. Over to the University of Buffalo.
Okay, so can I just maybe retell because we were talking about the first step, right? Why I'm doing this. No, to give the context of,
Yeah.
Yeah.
The question really is, why were you so crazy
right,
as to leave all the things that you'd learned about being in a classroom
right.
and being talked into maybe trying some of those?
Mhm.
Why?
So it was a privilege to be invited to participate in a series of events here at University of Texas, El Paso last year, 2010, in November.
Mhm.
And so I personally experienced these liberating structure activities as a participant, and then I went to Dr. Singal's class and observed, and how, I think we used fishbowl, right?
Mhm.
So how that could be done in the classroom setting. And I also remember I observed both of you when you were designing the workshop right before the liberating structure workshop. So it was different perspectives for me to see, and so at the end of the, I guess, 4 days, and I felt that was probably the most the deeply humbling and profound learning experience that I had ever had. If you remember when I told you,
Why was that?
through all these different processes and experiences, I did feel liberated.
Well,
So-
and then there was
Yeah.
a bunch of conversations also in between, walking around and so forth.
Right, I mean, to realize you're not alone and you can contribute and you can learn from others, the excitement of discoveries, right? And also to see that it's not really intimidating to be able to do that, when you were designing. There are details you have to pay attention to, but it's not too complicated to make the first step. And I see the results, right? We were there in different, formats, of structures or groups. And I just saw what emerged over the course of a day. That it's just absolutely unbelievable. And I just felt, I've become a new me. I'm not the same person anymore. And it's also because at the end of one of the events, we had this open space event. And so in open space, you're supposed to, if you are interested, it's self-selected, and you can propose an idea, and then you get into groups and you get feedback and suggestions in a small group on this particular project you're proposing. So what I did for open space is I proposed this project or idea of using liberating structures in university classroom settings. And it was perfect because I had just joined the university at Buffalo as a newly minted assistant professor, and I wasn't teaching the first semester, and I was about to teach, to start teaching in the spring. And I had all these different ideas. I've always enjoyed having very interactive elements in my classrooms when I was teaching as standalone instructor or a teaching assistant, discussion sessions. But this was really at a whole different level, right? And I just felt, this is it. I really have to do it. That's how I got started.
And I remember you proposed it in an open space session,
Yes.
which is a liberating structure.
Right.
And you, in that case, you wrote it as an idea up on a wall.
Yeah. Put it on the wall and
And
see.
What was it? Do you remember what you asked?
I just said, liberating structures in university classroom setting. And then I was surprised. I had, I think, maybe 12, 14 people who came to my session, including Arvind, Henry, Lisa, all people had some kind of experience and perspectives. And we shared a lot of stories and ideas. And so I felt really supported, right there when I decided to make the first step, right? Yeah, that's how I.
So from there, you decided to try it.
Right. If I didn't have the instant support, I might be hesitant once I get back to Buffalo. I did have the feeling though when I proposed. I remember holding that piece of paper and just, I have no idea what I'm getting myself into, but I'm sure it's gonna be, something amazing.
Takes courage.
Yes. Yes.
And you were right. You had no idea.
And I have to say, the timing was perfect because I had that spirit of experimentation, right? I have some teaching experience. I really want to provide meaningful experiences for my students. And for me, teaching has never been a top-down kind of, I give you the order, give you lectures, you pass an exam, you move on with your life thing. So it's all about, to me, it's always about sharing, but there are different ways of sharing. And this just gave me a lot of perspectives to structure the activities, to engage my students, and how to create this comfort and safe space. So I could play different roles, and I'm perfectly comfortable with that, not to be the only person in charge of the space, but more or less like a facilitator, right? To start it and work with the people, in the space.
Are there any stories, Helen, that you have that you wish to share, which may be representative or which embody your journey as a new to be liberating structures practitioner?
Yeah, I can't stop but thinking of this student in my undergraduate class. He came to he wrote an email about, I think, 3 classes, after 3 class meetings. So, 1.5 weeks into the new semester. It's pretty close to the drop deadline. And I had already by then tried out maybe about 2 liberating structures, maybe once or twice in my classrooms, just to test and how I feel about it and how my students feel about it. And I have to admit, I didn't know what I was, exactly what's gonna come out of it, and I could feel, not getting a piece of paper by the end of the 3rd class for my students, it was a big deal.
Like a syllabus.
The syllabus, right. And so this student emailed me and said, Professor, this is my last semester as an undergraduate student, and your class is a required class for me to be able to get this degree. And there are 3 sessions, but the other 2 sessions are all full, and at this point there's no way for me to switch to a different session. And I see you're trying a different approach in your class, and we're using a lot of group activities. But to be honest, I have been at this university for a number of years, not just 4 years, because I've tried out different majors and stuff. And I also work full-time in the aviation industry. So I work in groups all the time at work, which work just fine for me. You have a common task, in small group, you get it done, you move on. But in the academic setting, every single class that I participated in the group activity has completely failed me. And he said, what just happened to me this past semester, we were working on a group project, and we even had some plagiarism issues, and
He was trying to encourage you.
Oh, yeah. And so he says, there's no way, absolutely no way for me to be part of the group activities in your class. I resent this approach because it's gonna be a failure. And I don't want my last semester at this university to be a disaster. But I'm facing this dilemma. It's about the deadline. I have to take your class. I have no option. But I don't want to do what you're proposing to do in this class, which would be a big part of how I can get a good grade and graduate. So what do I do? And I'm like, whoa, right? I've got a challenger right there. So I invited him to come and have a conversation with me to share some honest, feelings and thoughts. So he did come to my office hours, and we had a pretty long conversation. I got to know a little bit what happened to him in other classes, and how disappointed he has been with group activities, in classes, and why he doesn't want to do it anymore. And I took a pretty, affirmative position in terms of trying out liberating structures in the classroom. And he said, "Oh, you're so defensive, you're not so open to other, opinions." And so in the end, I said, "Okay, how about this? I think I cannot say I'm revolutionary as an instructor. I think it could be beneficial to you as a student to have a very different learning experience in this class using this approach. I cannot guarantee. But I'm open to give options. So if you really insist after a few weeks that you do not want to be part of any class, group activities, I would give you the option to do that part on your own. It's a group of 1 versus a group of 2, 3, or 4 in other forms. Or you could choose to participate as we'll see. We'll make a decision as we go along, right? Mm-hmm. And so that was that. And we also had an episode. I think this was still around the same time. I think maybe before we had the conversation in my office, which was, I tried out the speed networking, to create the space and for the students to get to know each other better. And I did debrief, really talking about why we're using these different activities in the class, what would be the common goals, and what would be a better way to structure the class. So we actually, created a syllabus together, including everybody's input there, which was amazing. But I think this particular student, missed one class when we had everybody's input, and I collected, and we looked at the patterns and made some decisions together. So then the next time, I think it was the 4th time, when I was about to really, this is a critical time. We have to make a decision. We cannot just doing the trial version for too long. And so I was asking, we decided to have 10% of quizzes, so focusing on the solid knowledge, what it is that we're talking about. In my case, it was communication theory, so some basic theoretical constructs, models, propositions, right? The pros and cons. And then we decided for the second part, 30% of the class, the grade, would be about group activities, interactions. So you have to understand using examples, maybe demonstrations and all of that, which is to make sense, what we've learned.
Yeah.
Right, it's the so what part. And then 60% on what we call my experiments. So it's not just the theory as a theory on the paper, but from my reading, the quizzes and my group activities in the class when we meet, based from there, I can go out and try it out, experiment a little bit using these theories and see what kind of difference they can make, and come back and reflect on my experience and write an essay and share with the rest of the class, right? So that would be like, now what? I've learned this, I've tried out, I've discussed it, demonstrated. What can I do now to make a difference in my life using these things I've learned? So I think it was pretty good. All was going well, and most of the students were really like smiling. So hey, like I was part of this, like making the decision, right? And he said, "No, Helen, no, I don't think that this is gonna work. I just don't think it's gonna work." And I was like, "What? Like we're almost there. Like we're 99% there. Like about making a decision and move forward, right?" And he said, "No," in front of everybody else. 2 seconds later, I had another student across the classroom said, "Hey, no, it worked. You were not here last week. How could you say that it wouldn't work? It worked for us. No, we could learn from each other, and it's so exciting and interesting, and I think I've learned a lot." How could I know that I would have somebody, my other student in the crowd who has sensed the difference liberating structures could make, and stand up and defend for me, right, in that kind of circumstance. And then so that's how we decided, collectively, to go with this approach and try it out. But again, like I said, I gave this particular student the option if he insists. But what went on and became really amazing was he actually really enjoyed all these different activities. I guess in the beginning he thought this was just another class with some kind of group activities, right? Like you have to do most of the work if you're smarter than others and if you're more experienced, and there would always be slackers, and it's no different than other classes. But it turns out to be different, that he felt that he's a little bit older, he has more work experience, he had more examples and stories to share, and I encouraged him to share. I said, you seem to be in a position, actually, to offer more than others. Why not, right? And he did that, right? He did that. And so towards the end of the semester, I did course evaluations, asked for suggestions and feedback, and really how the students felt about it. And he became my best advocate of using liberating structures in classrooms. And he said, "I really appreciated that you kind of insisted using this experimental approach, taking the courage to work with us, and being so open to all different possibilities, even though it could be challenging and risky. And you're a contemporary and democratic professor, really cool. And I've learned a lot, and I think I might even use a couple in at work and see how that would work out for me."
So Helen, you took the plunge, first step, you had support, but you had challenges. So what do you say to others who may be in a similar position as you, who are intrigued maybe a little, who perhaps feel that they are not alone, they may have a little support? What do you tell them?
There are a few things I would recommend. The first is, I think to have the courage to use a few liberating structures in your classrooms, you have to be open-minded. You have to have a little bit of the spirits of adventures and experiments. You know, be willing to make mistakes and learn from the mistakes. And embrace that kind of a different approach. Embrace the diversity. And embrace it's a process rather than you are in control all the time. That's huge, I think. That's huge because most of us, you know, we are very well trained in the way we work. We're very good at going in there, giving a PowerPoint, handing out exams, and still, you know, feeling like we are making a contribution in people's lives, right? But this is you know different, and it could present new challenges, and you have to be willing to face that, and deal with the anxiety or the uncertainty. That's the first one. I would recommend to be open-minded and embrace the diversity and the difference. The second one is I would recommend that, you know, for someone who's interested but not having a lot of experience, like, you know, you or, you know, of course, Henry, I would recommend that you start small. You know, there are 30, 35 liberating structures there. You don't have to know everything, and you don't have to feel like you are the expert, like you would score like A+ on the test of liberating structures. You know, you can learn maybe one or two very well, how that works, and how that could be considered, you know, being used in your own context, educational context, or whatever the context you're thinking about. Try it out, you know, small steps, right? And another observation I have had is you want to keep the balance between the novelty of how different this experience could be and repetition or consistency. Because I think for a lot of people, if they've never had this kind of experience, there's a learning curve or adjustment or adaptation to how they would feel about it. You know, it may not be very easy in the beginning, but after a while, as you know, they get into a little bit of the routine of, they can be more aware of how this thing works, how they feel about it. They have to give them a little bit time. So you need a little, a frame, you know, a certain repetition to give them this space of their own to digest and to feel it. Rather than, I'm trying this one today. It didn't seem to, you know, have worked out so well that I'm going to try the other one or the next day. That's just going to confuse people, I think. But at the same time, you may not want to use the same activity all the time. So there's that balance that I think.
The thing that I would say is that, you know, Helen chose a particular way to enter this, which was radical. And saying, okay, I'm going to go with it, you know, and which required then quite a few hours of discussion and what do I do with the first class and the second class. There was a lot of sort of ongoing design and therefore a fair amount of stress and anxiety of not knowing what you're going to do next week, kind of a thing. You know, sort of until sort of after a while, then it sort of started rolling.
Right, we spent a lot of time, you know, on Skype
because
talking about it, brainstorming on the design and the feedback after each session. In the
because it was a total commitment.
Right?
That's not necessary. Yeah, I mean, that's great. I mean, if somebody's inclined to do this, wonderful. Yeah. The other way to go about it is to be opportunistic.
Right.
So instead of saying, going whole blast, to just look for things that are taking place in the course of the normal teaching that is done by a particular person, whatever it is that they're going to do, and look for opportunity to use 1, 2, or 3 different structure,
Right.
which are, they are there, you know, it's just a
Yeah.
matter of picking them.
Yeah.
You know, like
Yeah.
we were talking about this 1 to 4.
Right.
There is, in the course of a semester, there's a whole bunch of places where you can use something like that, you know, or we haven't talked about it, but we can talk, you know, a little bit more. You describe it, you know, Troika Consulting, very simple.
Yeah.
Every professor, every course, it doesn't matter what it is, you know, there will be opportunities where this could be used. Okay, so that would be the way, what we call an opportunistic way of, you know, using some of those in order to develop the comfort level to just then say, okay, now I'm starting to see what I can get out of this to then little by little build it. Yeah.
So Henry,
Well,
go ahead.
Can we, so, because Henry was talking about in the beginning how I actually had the luxury of having the expert or the, you know, the coaching
Friend.
sessions with a friend, yes.
That's better.
Yes, much better. Brainstorming. I really liked it. You know, like we spent quite a bit of time, especially in the beginning, brainstorming. So like, I really appreciate that part of having a partner to work with, bouncing around ideas and experimenting things and share the feedback and all of that. So the last point I really wanted to include in my recommendation for someone who is thinking about and considering trying out liberating structures is you don't want to do it by yourself. You don't necessarily have to have access to a expert friend, but it's nice to have conversations or to share your experience with a few others or at least one other person. So building a community of practice and sharing, you know, these experiences would be very helpful. I think, and especially related to creating this momentum for maybe even a movement. I think,
Faculty and student centered.
right. Yeah, so that would be my last point.
Those are excellent,
Recommendation.
excellent.
One other thing also one of the things that if one wishes to exercise that comes automatically with using liberating structure is the opportunity to get a lot of feedback from the students. Yeah, much more than in the standard way of operating, you know, because it just, they are already engaged in conversation, and a lot of the feedback comes without asking for it because it comes in the conversations that are taking place, you know. So in some way, for whether it's in a business setting or in some other environment, and it's the same thing I think for in a classroom, because you're creating all those conversations, the process of observing and participating or listening to some of this conversation is an incredible source of information. You really find out what people are thinking when they are talking to each other, much more than when you can find out if you ask them questions, you know, because you're seeing it, you know.
Yeah.
Okay. And you're, you know, so I think in a classroom environment where understanding is a big issue, okay, and knowing who understands why, and if they don't, why not, and how come, where is the confusion, what is not clear, what wasn't, you know, what is not getting through, you know, that's the sort of thing that comes out of being, you know, privy to hear those conversations or see them happening, yeah. Otherwise, this is totally hidden.
So, Lucia, you've known Helen for a while. You've known Henry. You've known me. You've seen and experienced and been in situations where you've experienced liberating structures as a participant. And you know, you're now starting. You're in a similar position as Helen was this past year. So, what courage do you need? What courage do you bring towards perhaps the possible incorporation of liberating structures in your own work experimentally, maybe opportunistically, And also, what anxieties do you have?
I think that for me, it was a matter of time before I would maybe decide to try this. And in some way, whether, you know, I was hired as a professor or I went on to a different kind of position, because I'm intrigued and I've been intrigued through my participation. So I have facilitated a couple of sessions, and one of them was a fishbowl session here at UTEP yesterday. And the other one, or the other two, were in a Plexus-oriented meeting in Louisville, Kentucky, with healthcare practitioners. So in both instances, I was very nervous, I think, kind of apprehensive, yet excited about trying it and having the opportunity to do so in a safe space and in a space where I would be able to get feedback from participants and from more seasoned facilitators. So what did that feel like? It was before the actual facilitation, it was that sense of, what if I mess this up, and what if I take the group, as if I had that much power, but let's say, you know, what if I take the group in the totally opposite direction that they need to go in, or if we're not as productive as maybe we could be. And because I've seen skilled facilitators, and one of the things that I love is the level of productivity, the engagement and the productivity. So what if I don't know how to ask the right questions? And in some cases I did ask the right questions, in other cases I didn't. But the key was that now I know what it feels like, and now I know how to ask better questions, let's say in a fishbowl. Or I got feedback from Henry yesterday that was very useful about the types of questions and how to get at concrete ideas versus abstract ideas. So for me, it's important to know that there are others out there that I can count on, and maybe I can call upon Helen and not just, you know, Henry and Keith and
Well,
Arvind.
it's also important to discover that this is not an exact science. So that there is, you know, they are simple methods, so you can learn them in one shot. And then they are subtle, so you can, you know, you can make little changes and it has some impact, and you can improve and you can get better and you can modify and you can play it around and you can, and so, you know. But you can use them simply and
Right.
still get, you know,
Yeah.
great outcomes. And so that's important.
I
yeah.
feel that's where I am, is in the simple execution
Yeah.
and the experimentation, with the motivation of what Helen mentioned today. She sees this as a way to optimize the teaching and learning experience or the meeting experience. So to me, optimize means, yes, make it better than it would be if I were doing my traditional.
See how I feel right now after, you know, trying out in 2 different classes for a semester is hearing or participating in liberating structure activities were very helpful to make the first commitment, but doing it, learning by doing, is very powerful.
It's
and-
the only way also.
Right, and I think what's unique about liberating structures is it's simple enough, and the way it's structured would, I think, set you up at a pretty good baseline to start with. You know, you can't really go too wrong, even if you don't do your best job for the first shot.
Yeah.
And so I'm pretty optimistic person, so I always feel like if you have the courage to make the first step, and then you can only go better, you know, do better and go up from there, rather than, oh, you know, it's you're going to create a disaster. I don't have that kind of anxiety.
And I think what you're saying is that, I mean, it's, one thing is to know about liberating structures, and then another thing
Is to
is
practice.
to know liberating structures. So you can know it as a participant and know, you know, the different, what you get out of an interaction. But to know it and to experience the actual, what's the best structure for
Right,
this particular
right.
purpose.
Yeah.
I think
That's
is-
why I brought it up. I mean, the reason why I sort of felt I could try was because not only I experienced it as a participant, but also I saw, you know, the different things you need to do when you have to prepare for the workshops and the details here and there that you need to pay attention to. So you have the different perspectives. Like, you know, now if you're doing it, you are more aware, more conscious about these are the key elements. These are absolutely critical that you keep them as they are, but there are also a few other things you could be more spontaneous and alter a little bit on the spot given the context. So that, I mean, that is very different from being just a participant and feel, oh, I'm liberated, right?
So what we are saying is that if you want to engage with liberating structures, you have to really engage with it by doing it, by trying it, by experimenting with it, not as a blind person, as somebody who has some knowledge of what the key elements of these structures are, which of course would be clarified when you implement it. And if you do it in collaboration with somebody who maybe can serve as a coach or as a guide, as a demonstrator, as a co-facilitator, observer,
Yes, absolutely.
That's the big deal.
then you know, these communities of practice
Yeah.
can slowly emerge and expand.
I think, you know, that reminds me of a few things. So what I did, I really liked, I think, to enhance my own learning experience of understanding and practicing liberating structures was not only me really consciously observing what is going on when I'm doing it, but also I had a TA, I had a teaching assistant. So I said, okay, here are a few things you could help me, but you could not only remind me to keep on track, but you know, but also what are your observations? How did you feel about it? It's, you know, she's not, sometimes she participated, but a lot of times she was really just there and observing me and how this whole thing, you know, went, right? So having that kind of feedback, and then getting the feedback from my students, because for both of my classes, a similarity is I asked my students to write learners' journals. So they would provide their reflections on what they've learned to make sense, you know, right? And I would not require them to talk about the specific activities that we did in class, but I invite them, you know, I invited them to, you know, for my undergraduate students, I said, you know, for extra credit, you know, assignments, you could reflect on what we've done in the class and how that contributed to your understanding of the theories and your own experiences and what, if it made any difference or if you have any suggestions to make. And for my graduate students, they have a little bit longer sort of, you know, writing they do, but I never said, oh, you have to reflect on this, but if they find it very intriguing and really made a difference, they actually write about their experience and, you know, reflect on that part voluntarily. So then I also keep sort of the documentation of this journey as much as I can, even though we're all very busy and sort of chaotic, you know, middle of a semester. As I copy paste some comments, right, from my students. So you keep track of your own observations. You know, the design after I talk to, you know, with Henry, what are the things I'm gonna do in this class? I have, you know, for my undergraduate class, 80 minutes. These are the things, you know, I'm gonna do. So you have a documentation of what exactly you did.
Right.
Which may or may not be exactly the same as, you know, when we introduce people.
It's
to,
always
yeah.
a little different.
Yeah, it's always a little difference here and there. and then the observations,
Sure.
right? And the feedback.
Right.
So,
And,
yeah.
and one of the, since we're talking about structure, one of the structure is a debrief. You know, one of the structure, one of the liberating structure is the debrief. You know, the famous what, so what, now what, which provides a very useful structure for doing feedback in a way that is effective. Yeah, and that can include one other person as a single observer, or they can include a whole
As a
group.
group.
Yeah, and make the feedback really tangible, you know, and useful. And so that part of it is, I think, essential, because we were talking about it yesterday. I think that the benefit of really doing this together with somebody else, and really having a deliberate process in place to learn is the best way to guarantee that the learning is quite rapid. You know, that you, from one interaction to the other, is real progress, instead of you do it and then the next time you do it pretty much the same, and there's no, you know. So I think this is really, really quite valuable, and it's simple, and it's much more interesting, and it's more fun, and than doing it alone. Yeah, and the thing that that also, and that becomes more a little more experimental, but the thing that is necessary also is at some point to start getting comfortable enough to start pushing the envelope.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you start
Improvising,
modifying, you know, and then and being prepared to fail. You know, because
or
what-
I don't know.
Well,
yeah.
you have to be prepared to fail, you know, to find out
Right,
something
yeah.
new.
Right,
You know?
right, exactly.
And so the failure has to be an acceptable failure,
Yes.
you know. And I think what is great about liberating structure is that they are small things. You know, it takes half an hour, or it takes 20 minutes, or 15 minutes, or whatever. So you're not, you know, sacrificing
Your entire
your
semester.
entire semester.
Right,
You know,
right.
so you try something.
Right.
And it's still, the failure is still within the range of what you have already accomplished by the fact that you have included everybody. Okay, so it's a relative thing, but you need to do that. You need, you know, like, you know, I remember the thing you did, because it's only that way you discover new things that you can do. Yeah.
Actually, yeah, so that's what I was thinking. It may not necessarily lead to a failure. It actually would, you know, lead to a new discovery that, oh, maybe that could work this way too, you know, without changing too much.
But it's the willingness to fail that makes it
Right.
possible for you
That's
to
what
make
made-
a discovery.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's
Right.
what I mean, yeah.
Yeah,
What do we say
So,
to...
can I ask you a question?
Please.
I seem to have heard that you're doing something different in your classroom as well, that you are not, you know. So there must have been a beginning to that, you know. So can you share some story about how you started? I mean, the first time you did it, or the second, or whatever, some of the...
So, Henry, thank you for asking me how come I become the teacher or lecturer or facilitator that you think I am. And, it's a long answer, but let me just see if I can reflect on some key points. So let me begin with where I think I am now, with respect to how I engage with a classroom, and then maybe go back and point at some pivotal moments or events or transitions. So at this time, this may come as a surprise to many, to me as well, that I usually try to go into a classroom quite unprepared. And what does that mean? This means that I usually don't go in with a script. I usually do not go in with an agenda. I usually would not be able to diagram for myself what those 1.5 or 2.5 or 3 hours would look like. Now, clearly there's a syllabus that you arrived at, so you know that you're not going into a room cold. People have done a few readings.
It sounds to me like this is a deliberate choice, right?
It is a very deliberate choice.
So why?
It is a deliberate choice because, first of all, it's highly liberating for me to trust that whatever happens would be fine, and that if one went in with an open mind, which of course is full of possibilities, one could work with the energy, one could work with the ideas, and one could then allow things to emerge which otherwise would not emerge. And how did one get to this point? It's really by doing it. I'm quite certain, the first time I went into a classroom here in the US 28 years ago as a TA, I was prepared, and I had a textbook, and I had a lesson plan, and I delivered it. In fact, my evaluations for my first teaching assignment, which I still have in hard copy, said, his technique is straight lecture. And he is excellent at straight lecture. So my supervisor, Gary Edgerton, was a professor of Super 8 filmmaking. At that time he used to, I was teaching filmmaking, the lecture part, and it was straight. We had a textbook, they had to read a few things, and I would go over those things plus, the tutorial stuff which Gary and the core teaching team had provided me. I think things began to change quite dramatically in terms of what I was observing as some alternative teaching strategies or different ways of pedagogies when I came to the Annenberg School 1985 and began to very closely observe, in particular, the way Professor Everett Rogers conducted class, and not just conducted class, but conducted life. Because there was a certain consistency in the way in which he created a comfortable, participatory, engaging, inclusive environment, whether in the corridor or whether in the office or in a classroom. And he often went into a classroom seemingly unprepared. Of course, this has been for him a life's preparation. He'd been working and dabbling, writing, researching, and so it wasn't very hard for him to come up with content. That was the last thing, because there were so many more experiences that he could bring to the table than what a textbook would allow him to. So I think in that sense, the repertoire, the reason why I feel that I can go into a class seemingly unprepared without a script is because maybe I am at a point in which I can draw a little from this and draw a little from that, connect this with this and connect this with that, which also means you've got to be fully present. You've got to be fully present in the moment in terms of seeing what's happening. And in order to get here, you've got to constantly practice it. And after a while, it's...
So does that include, what I'm hearing is you're unprepared in terms of content?
yes.
Meaning you don't have a prepared speech or a prepared presentation or something that you're going to deliver in terms of content. Are you also unprepared in terms of what I call structure or process, or do you have at least an idea to start?
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to start in this form.
Yeah.
We're going to start.
Yeah.
Do you have something that
Yes.
is in your mind to
Yes.
start?
Yeah. I'm not sure that, like sequentially in terms of a time order,
No,
that,
but
when I.
something to get kick off that, and then after that.
Right. And actually, usually most of my courses are designed in a way that they can start with multiple things.
Mhm.
So for instance, students write their reflective journals, which are based on the readings that they've done and the discussion that they've engaged in the previous class session. And so a perfect point of starting as a way of not just summarizing, but reflecting on what has happened the last time and preparing, the platform for the discussions to happen in this particular class, and also to bring in their reflective input. You say, hey, I want to begin with learner notes, and the floor is open. And so Helen may say, I would love to share my learner note entry. And then, I may say, Helen, terrific. And would you please
So-
read it for me?
So taking that as an example,
Yes.
would that be something that is premeditated? Or you meaning by that you sort of knew when you were walking into that particular class on that particular day that you were going to start with that? Or do you decide that, really in the moment?
In the moment.
In the moment.
In the moment.
And-
And because one is very alert, when you enter a classroom, maybe this is again an Ev Rogers style. You see Lucia and you say, hey, Lucia, looking very good. And she says, oh yeah, I got my whatever, I colored my hair, or I'm using this, and whatever. And then you say, oh, okay, has the class learned about the hegemony of commercial products, or how our face is colonized? And they'll say, no, what the heck is that? And then I say, okay, well, let's pull out a piece of paper, let's draw a face.
Okay.
And
What about the structure? I mean, you come in the room, there is structure.
yes,
You can't avoid that. There is
That's
some
right.
structure.
it's for me, the last 10 years or so, I've always looked for creating a circle.
So
And
that's a given.
it's a
to
given
start.
for me. It's a given for me.
At least as a starting
Exactly,
structure.
yeah. And which basically means that the first day of class,
Mhm.
when the rows are arranged the way they are, I never go into class ahead of time to rearrange.
Mhm.
I first, let people sit where they wish to sit. Some people leaning back, looking at the heads of others, and then we creatively destroy it. They creatively destroy it. It's critical. And you may come back to the next class session, and the structure is the same.
Sure.
And then you just smile,
Mhm.
right? And then you say, all right, does anybody have any ideas about what we'll do next?
Yeah.
And some people catch on, and a few desks may begin to move, and they have created. The other thing is, sometimes a student may walk in and then they sit behind somebody.
Mhm.
They've come in late, and then you say, welcome. We will open the thing. And if there are extra chairs, too many extra chairs, you say, can you kick them out? So that is it's almost instinctive. For instance, you may remember we were in Eva Moya's class. We were in a small room. We had maybe 40 chairs, and there were 43 people. Well, there were 43 chairs, but there were 40 in the inner circle. And there were 3 people who were out.
Mhm.
And they seemed very comfortable being out.
Sure.
And I said, I know it's going to be a squeeze, but we've got to somehow find a way to accommodate our three friends in the inner circle. And they said, we are very comfortable here. And we said, well, we'd really like you to be part of the circle. And maybe we were a little insistent. We had already accommodated a lot of people in the inner circle, but there was something which was speaking to me that, gee, this is bothering me. And
You remind me of a story which has nothing to do with education, but it has to do with the same one aspect of what you say, which I think is very interesting. And that is, and Kurt's brother, I don't know if you've
I know,
ever met him.
Bob Lindbergh?
Yeah,
Yes.
Bob. I remember years back, him telling the story when he became part of our complexity community and started getting interested in, understanding things that way and making sense of things. He changed his practice, the way and one of the stories that I will always remember, that one of the things that he changed was that he was describing the fact that at some point he stopped having a rigorous diagnostic process. And instead, when somebody would come in the room,
Right.
his way was to be absolutely present there and to just sort of welcome that person and say something that is whatever came through his mind in the moment.
Precisely. Yeah.
And which had nothing to do necessarily with, what's wrong with you or that kind of thing, but noticing something, and, like, oh, this is very nice hat you have.
Yeah.
I've never seen you with this hat before, or whatever, and then letting the conversation flow to that. And I remember he'd tell that story, in front of doctors. I've seen it happen a whole bunch of that. And the reaction was, but, isn't this a total waste of time?
Yeah.
And he said, no. What I found is that by doing this, I got to figure out what was wrong with
Yeah.
that person faster than if I followed
The routine
the
interrogation.
procedure.
Yeah.
And that didn't make any sense to anybody.
Yeah.
And he always tried to explain that the reason why is because by doing this, I think I establish a contact that is such that I'm accessing information
Yeah.
much more effectively
Yeah.
than I would otherwise, and I'm accessing information that I would never access if I went through the question and answer sort of session, the interrogatoire kind of thing,
I think
And
that's
so this improvisation,
Yeah.
and this confidence
Yeah.
reminds me, when you tell your story, it reminds me of that, the same thing, that he had to let go
Right.
of the,
Right. Right. And at the same time, you always can fall back.
of course,
So it's not that
that's not lost.
it's not lost. And you also know that sometimes by engaging in such non-linear, random cues, you may find ways to connect it in a way that now others can relate to. And relationally, by virtue of connecting with a Helen, and then connecting Helen's ideas with, Lucia's, connecting Helen's hats with Lucia's shoes, or whatever, you can create a sort of a wow or an aha moment for others that, gee, we could begin with no particular purpose, or gee, I didn't know where this was going. So it's a dynamic process, and you can find ways, while somebody else is talking, to connect a few things. In terms
So
of,
I could see other professors at UTEP say to you that, well, yeah, this is great, you're lucky, Arvind. I mean, you're teaching communication, so that's no problem for you to do that. But I teach accounting,
or
And,
civil engineering.
and there's no way in the world that I can do what you're doing.
And to them, I'll say, well, you clearly are entitled to how you think, because something that you've arrived at. However, there are many things which have really nothing to do with aspects of the content. You know, you may have a little lecture or solve a certain problem which can only be done in a certain way, and maybe that's the kind of structure you need. But the relational structure, how you relate to students in a classroom as human beings, with names, or creating the conditions for connecting people or relating ideas with people, is something which can be done more mindfully. And it can be done more mindfully. I think if you go in with a script, you're not there in the moment. You've completely lost it. Because then you're worried about the script. Then you're worried about, you know, oh gee, where am I? And so on and so forth. And that's fine too. And there's nothing wrong with it. It's that kind of a structure. And who knows, maybe there are certain disciplines, you know, the humanities or the social science, which allow us to be perhaps a little more flexible with respect to, or, you know, we find more opportunities to engage with this, because we also have been taught that way, you know, and in a communication class, you know, you learn a little bit about communicating. If it's a class on group communication, you learn a little about. So I think maybe we come with less structured or more relational mindfulness than maybe some others. I'm just making that as a case in point. But yet, the opportunities to engage with students at a different level, and the opportunities that you can create for class participants to engage with others is completely in your hand, I think. So this has implications, you know, not just for a classroom. You know, I've done workshops. I did a workshop on positive deviance in Netherlands a few months ago. And these are all, you know, people from the Dutch Research Council and the Dutch CDC and
all people with a great sense of humor.
With a great sense of humor and, you know, a real love for data and PowerPoint. And I had no PowerPoint. I had a little table, and there was a Tibetan gong right next to me. And, you know, the chairs were arranged like this, and my host said, this is gonna they're gonna wonder where they are, because what is this? This is a New Age seminar? And I began by ringing the bells, and I began to talk about vibrations and consciousness, and she said, oh shit, where is this going? And, well, it went, and they were engaged, and they did little work and groups and this and that, and they said, this is a phenomenal experience we've had. And we say, oh, those dumb people from the Dutch Research Council who could change.
Well, the thing I believe that makes so many people react so positively, you know, is that whenever you use structures like this, or this kind of, you know, or free-flowing approach, it gives them the opportunity to connect with each other, as opposed to just connecting with the subject matter, with the content. Yes. And that's where the pleasure comes from.
Yeah.
I mean, the content connection will be there in any case, but the personal connection is what really makes the whole difference. You know, and it's sort of, and if the focus on the content is too much, there is no space for that.
Yeah. And usually there's far more we think we need to do.
Mhm.
You know, our classes are, if you take the traditional approach, you're always like, you know, like a rolling train, and you've got to keep rolling in a certain way. Yeah. And you know, if your train's not going to stop at this stop, it's not going to stop. It's going to go. And you know, so even if somebody asks a question, you say, "I'm sorry, but you know, we'll deal with it in, you know, the 11th week." And so I think it can be a way to bring some spontaneity, to bring opportunities for connection, but it does take practice.
Yeah.
You've just got to practice and practice and practice and practice. And you can begin with an undergraduate class, and then you know, you keep doing it, and then you're very comfortable with a bunch of PhDs from Dutch Research Council and this and that. So and I think that mindfulness is key, because it's that mindfulness which allows you to make connections. Which,
Yeah.
you know, so it's something that you're cultivating. Every time I go into a classroom, if I have to be fully present, if I'm seemingly unprepared, I have to be in the moment all the time, which means my radars are pointing in 11 different directions at the same time. And that's something that you keep cultivating. And it you know, becomes a habit, muscle memory. And
But the focus is on
others,
others,
yeah,
as opposed to focusing
on what the heck am I going to do?
about
Yeah.
the self. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So you're constantly looking for, you know, we know the importance of feedback, but here it's also feed forward. No, it's feedback. You're sensitive to what's happening, and you keep cultivating it, and you keep cultivating it. And you know, if there's somebody, if there are 50 people in an audience, and there's one who is engaging it in a different way, I notice it right away. You know, and it's like I'd say, oh yeah, you know, there's one person here who's shaking their head, so let's go to them.
Yeah. I think what you're describing is what comes out of long practice.
Yes.
You know, all the
Yeah.
the finesse and the subtle points and the sensitivities and that sort of thing. The good thing is that you don't have to start with that. You
No.
can start with just using the structure
Yeah.
and doing it in an approximate fashion and still, you know,
Yes.
getting a lot of participation,
Right.
a lot of,
Right.
and then taking the rest of it along the way, which becomes kind of a personal thing also, because
Yeah.
I think that different personality will deal with that, you know,
Yeah.
in a very different way. And it isn't, but
Yeah.
the thing that I think, for me, remains always is that there is also, at least I can never do any of this without some remaining amount of anxiety.
Oh, it's always there. It's just that you
Because
get.
you don't know,
Yeah. Mhm.
you don't know where you're going.
Yeah.
You don't know what's going to
Yes.
happen. You don't know.
Right.
You know that you're not in control.
That's right. Yeah.
And that's,
Yeah.
and that, there's always some, you know,
Yeah. Yeah.
and at the end of whatever it is that you're doing, you say,
Yeah.
Well.
It's over. Ooh. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It worked again. It was
Right.
wonderful. And
Right.
so,
Right.
But there's always that anxiety.
There always is. There always is. And part of the practice is to internalize it,
Mhm.
at least in the moment. You know? And those are the finesses that you work on. You know, you may be asked, really, you know, you may be put on the spot, let's say, in a public setting. And your muscle memory can work very well when that happens, you know, because you didn't know where that was coming from, and you know who was going to do it, and with what velocity, and with how much, you but you sort of pause and you breathe in and you say, okay, it's coming at me. I can just deflect it. I can flip it around. I can agree with the nature of the statement, but say, but there may be other ways of doing things. So you develop a capability, practice, by way of which you can take the sentiment, which may seem very explosive and very confrontational, and find a way to come out smiling. And not just come out smiling in a personal way, but help enrich the conversation. So, yeah. So practice. You gotta keep doing it, keep doing it, keep doing it, keep doing it, keep doing it. And trust the process and trust who's in the room.
Yeah.
That is fundamental.
Well, whatever shows up was there to start with.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Was the, what I, there was a question that was asked at some point in the last couple of days about chaos. Yeah. And one of the things for me certainly was to learn that chaos is okay, because I was raised in an environment and trained in an environment and worked in an environment where whenever there was chaos, that meant you had done something wrong. So whenever there was sort of confusion or messiness or that kind, that means you're not in control. You've done something wrong. You're doing a bad job. And so getting over that and accepting that, oh no, on the contrary, this is a necessary ingredient, and you need to worry when there isn't any.
Yeah.
It's like everything is under control,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You're either lying or you are incompetent.
Yeah.
And so it's, but it, when you talk about muscle memory, when you have lived with that sort of mental framework or model, for 30 years, it's sort of,
you get better at it.
it takes time to get over it.
And then appreciate it and respect it. So if somebody says, I disagree with you, it's like, great, thank you. I mean, I'm glad you disagree. Or thank you for being you don't say for being an idiot. It's like, wow, Jason, wow, it's great that you are here. Or if Harry says, you can thank me after it's over if it goes well, I say, well, even if it didn't go well, that'll be even better. And, and those kinds of things become it's a certain mindset, which is almost instinctive, because you have been in situations when somebody walks up to you and says, gosh, what a waste of time. And you have to learn to first tolerate it, first listen to it, then, and not respond, tolerate it. And, the journey from toleration to celebration is a very long journey.
Yeah, and some of those reflexes are so old and
exactly.
so ingrained.
Ingrained, yeah.
The reflex
Yeah.
to debate,
exactly.
to fight back, to
Right.
argue
Right.
back.
Right.
I mean, it
Right.
just,
Yeah.
you grow up with that.
Right.
And very,
And that has tremendous implications for what kind of a tone or an ambiance one creates in a classroom. If a student challenges you and you jump all over them, you are setting, and you must have done that a few times and be very mindful of it to then, train yourself to
I've seen this happen not long ago in an auditorium with a CEO, and actually that thing was, I guess, broadcast all over the world probably too, who gave a presentation and then asked, are there any questions? And the first question that came, that guy was blasted. the last question.
I see, okay.
Yeah. So,
It happens, it happens.
I mean, on the other hand, if you have that kind of open-minded mindset, you could cultivate that. And I remember, because I tried out some activities, and I can feel my students were struggling, and I showed a TED Talk by Sir Ken Robinson talking about how schools are killing creativity.
Creativity, yeah, that's a good
What
one.
is this professor
Yeah.
showing us?
Right.
It seems to make
Yeah.
sense, but who in the world at a university, would show you that? But then you encourage them, you invite them
Yeah,
to raise questions, to challenge you.
yeah,
Then instead of killing it right away,
right.
you actually, it grows out of.
And it surprises them when you do that.
Of
Again,
course.
because they are not used to that response.
Not at all.
You know, when they are throwing a cannon ball at you, they are expecting something in return. At least machine gun fire, if not. And when you turn it into a flower and then present it to everybody, the rules of engagement change.
Yeah.
And that has a tremendous effect on the tone of the room.
Yeah,
And the ambience of the room. I think it creates a community where others can feel that it's okay to disagree, but it's also okay to maintain for instance, at the Clinton School of Public Service, there was a student who wrote in her reflection paper that we had created a sacred space, over 2 months. And in the last class, I felt that it was violated. And so again, it opens, so I went to her and I said, would you be open to us bringing in this notion? You don't disregard these things or sweep them under the rug, but you look at that as an opportunity. Yesterday, as I was saying, there was a woman who, after, while we were doing the first exercise, she called me and she said, you should know that this is a very insensitive exercise. And there's several of us here who cannot stand, and to impinge this on us or mandate this on us is being very, very insensitive. And then look at all these women who are wearing high heels, and they're teetering, and you better find a way to have them sit down and so this is a side conversation that's happening. And so I said, would you like to share this and bring this out? And she, no, I just wanted you to know. So, I said, okay. And then I said, would you like me to bring, to apologize? Or, and she said, no, it's fine. I don't think she was expecting that response. Maybe she was. And, then I brought it out in a, humor can be invaluable if you can.
the other thing that you make me think of, and which for me is a very important element and reason also for using liberating structures, is that it is not possible in any group, whether it's a classroom or in a meeting or whatever, to know and anticipate how all the different people will understand, react, etc., to whatever is going on. You have a whole bunch of different personality, a whole bunch of different level of either knowledge or expertise or familiarity. You have all this diversity, and the only way to address diversity is with diversity. And therefore, this is where liberating structures come in, that you can use a variety of them, so that everybody somehow will find their space, will find the opportunity for them to express themselves and to get out of what is going on what they need. So the shy person will find their place, and the one that is too loud will be, you know,
In a
strain,
corner.
or not, you know, damage the whole
Mhm.
experience for everybody, or
Mhm.
dominate the conversation, so, etc. You know, the one that really is, you know, one of the things that is great about peer-to-peer kind of thing, or when you use a Troika consultant and so forth, is that it gives a space for those that are ahead of the others
Mhm.
to do something useful instead of sitting there being bored and say, I know all this, you know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But if you engage them in peer-to-peer, now they have a role,
Right.
which is, you know, to work with the others and help others and consult and, you know, being
Right.
challenged by questions and things,
Right.
et cetera, et cetera. And that, to me, is quite important, because otherwise you try to have one thing that is good for everybody, and that is impossible.
Yeah.
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 Mhm.
Yeah.
Can we talk a little bit about the structures that we've used here at UTEP?
Sure.
Well,
Now a good
since you just
time.
brought up Troika and 50%,
Mhm.
why don't we?
Yeah, so Henry, let's ask the question, what is Troika? Where does the word Troika come from? What and what relevance, usefulness, practicality, meaning does it have for people who work with groups?
Well, we learned yesterday from one of the professors who clearly comes from Russia, that Troika refers to three horses,
A lead horse and then
lead
two
horse
behind.
and two behind, okay. And, which I was not aware of, because I've only heard it used in connection with a Troika, a group of three, that is three leaders that are, you know, leading like a country, like it was in Russia and that kind of thing. So in any case, so Troika is bringing three people together, and the particular one that we're talking about here is not just the three people in a group of three, but a consulting process. So we call it Troika Consulting, and we have three people together, and each one is given a certain amount of time. So the standard, the basic structure is 10 minutes each. Okay, so each member of the Troika has 10 minutes to present a challenge or problem or whatever it is that they are currently dealing with that is of importance to them. You know, say quickly what it is and what they have done or thinking of doing and so forth, and then ask for help. So here are my questions, here are what I'm not sure about, or here, whatever it is that they want to say. And then it is the task of the other two for the remainder of the time to try and help that first person. And when the 10 minutes are over, you switch to the second one, same scenario, here's my challenge, da-da-da, da-da-da, and please help, you know, here's my question, and so forth to the third. So it's a 30-minute exercise if you take 10 minutes like that.
Right.
And that is broken in three pieces where each one has 10 minutes for himself. So it's 10 minutes, you know,
Right.
for me, you know,
Right.
which is pretty rare. You know.
Yeah, that you are, yeah.
Given that kind of
Sure.
exclusive, you know,
Right.
focus on yourself and your problem by a
Right.
couple of other people. So it's a very, very simple
Mhm.
technique, if you want. It is very effective. It is very often people are surprised by what comes out of it, you know. And usually what happens is that the first consultation is at one level, the second tends to get better, and the third tends to get better than the second. Not automatically, not always, because it depends on the
Sure.
subject, but there is, you know, there is a build-up, you know, there's a quality that improves. And of course, if you use it once in a group, it's one thing, but if you use it repeatedly over some period of time in a department or in whatever, you know, people start developing skills that are absolutely fundamental, which is, number one, ask for help. How to ask for help. Number two, how to formulate a problem so that other people can understand it. And how to formulate the real problem as opposed to, you know, something that is not the real problem. You know? And thirdly, clearly, you know, developing consulting skills, which is an incredibly effective way of learning. because when you help others, you learn things for yourself. So it's a very, very simple method. As an example, I know someone who is using this regularly for their weekly staff meeting. That's the first thing that they do when they start the staff meeting, and after that they cover the agenda. So the first thing they do is to spend time with everybody, getting their 10 minutes of attention. And it has very quickly changed the relationships in the department, the level of trust, and the atmosphere, and so forth. It's been incredibly effective for her. We often tie it up with something that we call 15%. And the idea of 15% is that every one of us is very aware of all the things that we cannot do, or that we don't want to do. And it's much more difficult to be conscious of what we can do. When we are with Keith, he always talks about the shadow. The 15% is what's behind you, what you don't see. The 85% is what all the things you see
that you can do.
And usually others are much better at seeing your 15% than you are. So we talk about 15% solution, which is asking the question, what are the things that you can do? What is it that you have the freedom, the resources, that you don't need permission, you don't need anything. You can just decide to do it, and you can do it. And so quite often in this Troika consulting, one of the suggestions we make is, one of the things that you can do is ask the question, here's my challenge, and here's my 15%. Here's what I think I can do. What do you think? What other 15% solutions can you think of that I could do? So that's the method. Is that clear?
Yeah, it's very clear, and I
you
tried
have
it.
used
And talking about how effective that can be, and I thought it was a perfect way for my graduate students to talk about their ideas for their research projects, and that they get to a point where they have some ideas, they have some structures and design, but they really need some feedback. They know they're pretty aware of the challenges they face, and so this was perfect. That when I had this class meeting, but I was running out of time, and I figured, but we really needed to do that day. So what I did was a minor variation of Troika in combination with the 15% solution. I had a class of 9 graduate students, so they were in group of 3, of course. And then instead of the 10 minutes, each person, I asked them to spend 2 minutes to explain their research idea, the topic, briefly, and what kind of resources they have available to carry out the project, the 15%. And then another 2 minutes for other people to ask questions, provide feedback, suggestions. And so we actually ended up finishing the class, well, at least that part of the class, early, to my surprise. And everybody felt, wow, really, literally, wow. So there was bam, 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 really fast, really into the moment. I really have to think, I've got all these ideas, and I only have 2 minutes to make sure everybody understands me, and so I can get feedback, useful feedback.
Right.
And so they were all engaged, and then they found it so efficient. I had so many of them commented in their learners' journals to say that was very efficient, and different kind of activity they've had in their classes.
So that's a great story to me, because it shows how you can take one of those structures and with some imagination, adapt it to the situation that you're dealing with. Right? So in a situation like this one, where the nature of what needed to be addressed was already known, you can sort of tailor the time, which is one of the variables there, to what you're dealing with. Whereas if you were dealing with something where you don't even know what kind of thing people are going to bring up, you need to leave space so that there is a chance that something will come out of it. Otherwise, you just get frustration because people need to get value out of this.
Right.
Yeah. It has to be. They have to get something tangible out of it. And so showing, small changes, big differences possibly. There is a variation on this, which we call the small group consultation, where, and there again, I will say the basic structure, and then you can make changes, which is very powerful. And there, when we do it, the basic structure is with 5 people, and we give 15 minutes to each. So that's a fairly
Substantial time.
It's an hour and 15 minutes or something, if I can calculate properly. And so there we layer some additional structure into that, in the sense that we slice the time, a little bit like what you were doing. So we give like 2-3 minutes, I think, to present your problem. And we give, I think, 3 or 4 minutes for the other 4 to ask clarifying questions. Only clarifying questions.
No fixing, no solving.
No solving, nothing, just clarifying questions, which is the most valuable part, by the way. Asking questions very often makes a lot of things disappear. And then there's like 7-8 minutes, I think, for the consultation session, and that is done with the consultee turning around, so presenting their back to the other 4. So the other 4 conduct their consulting session without any visual, verbal feedback or anything from. And then, of course, the consultee is just in a listening mode, instead of interacting with the client. And then the last minute, that person turns around and says, okay, this is what I have picked up, and this is what I like, and this is what I think I'm going to do. And you do that 5 times in a row. It's pretty unlikely that something powerful will not happen. It's really quite a process. And so this is, again, changes in structure, and of course, we were talking about doing it with 3, we're talking about doing it with 5. You get comfortable with this one, you get comfortable with that one, and then you start playing around, you make modification, you adjust it to your situation, and so forth. And now, from 2 structure, you have now a half a dozen or more variations that you have tried around that you can.
So the point that we are making about liberating structures is that really there are no limits to these structures, and there's always a basic design, but they can be used depending on the context, depending on the situation. There's room for improvisation, there's room for using a hammer and a spanner at the same time. That multiple tool, what's that, Swiss knife? And it's pretty endless, because you can see them one at a time. Okay, so with one you change what happens in one session. Okay? But with several of them, now you're going to use several to change what happens for a project. So it's like Lego pieces. You have a whole bunch of different Lego pieces, different configuration, and so forth. And if you now imagine a box of 35 things, the number of combinations is endless. And in addition to the variations on each one, because even that simple thing that we were talking about, the 1, 2, 4, all. Well, I mean, you can do 1, 2, 4, all, or you can do 1, 3, all, or you can do, the basic, depending on what it is that you're trying to do. The amount of time that you're going to give to each step is also a variable. But the way you get there is to first do it sort of, what I call the basic, buy the book, get comfortable with that, and then start fooling around and do other things. So Henry, tell us a little about appreciative interviews, and also how they can be combined, used with other liberating structures. It seems that they can go well along with 1 through 4 that we've discussed before.
So let me add, before I jump down, let me add something to, as an example. You were asking earlier a question about what can a single person do, or a single student do, or a single member group do. So if you take Troika Consulting, for instance, as an example, right, that is something that you can do on your own. You don't have to be in a classroom. You don't have to be in a meeting. You know, you just need two
Trusted.
people that you can grab and take them to lunch, or go have a beer, or bring them into your room or in your office and say, would you mind, 10 minutes, do you have 10 minutes to devote that? I have something I want to ask you. So it is part of your 15% if you choose to exercise it. So if you do this, once and never again, okay, it's just a blip,
Right.
But you do it once and twice, and so those people that have come to help you, say, hey, this is maybe one of them said, this is interesting. Yeah.
And also it
I'm
gives
gonna
you
try.
a,
I'm going to try, or why don't we do that in our next meeting? Or, so there are multiple avenues of dissemination. It isn't, it doesn't have to cut.
And I think right now is a good time, before we move on, to talk briefly about the way I plan to use Troika Consulting
Sure.
this semester.
That's great.
So I'm teaching a workplace writing class, and the assignments are memos, letters, proposals, reports, instructions. It's that nature of assignment. And it's for business students, and I'll be teaching rhetorical theory, just as a background to go with this. But one of the ideas that we're going to try is to see if, prior to turning in, say, a letter, students meet in groups of 3 in Troika Consulting structure and help each other undergo a quality management process, whereby which before the letter reaches me, the professor, they have consulted with each other and think that it's in good shape, it's ready to go. It's either, at an A or a B.
It's not one letter, right? It's 3, one for each.
Yes, each student would bring in, so each student brings in individual letter that they have written from beginning to end, and they consult with 2 others and decide if it's ready to go to me or not, and if not, why not? What changes can be made? And then they would report to me and let me know, you're getting 1 letter, or you're getting 2, or you're getting 3 today, and by next class you should have all 3, so.
All right.
Thank you. That's the precious goal for all of us.
To let Bobby know.
yeah, I'll let Bobby know. Yeah. It'll, that's,
Sorry,
and
it's Dr. Singhal.
Dr. Singhal, yeah. And I will ask senior lecturer, our honorable Bobby Gutierrez, what he can do. Pulling out audio is a little less cumbersome than pulling out everything, because then you've got to. So we'll provide you with the audio. It may take, depending on when Sir Gutierrez can help do this for us, but shortly, within a week or 2, or maybe sooner.
Oh, it's contagious.
I know, please don't pass it. Don't pass it over you.
So where were
Yeah, I
we?
thought we had lost you for a while.
Yeah. Troika?
I
Wait.
know.
You looked like you were in a classroom with somebody lecturing.
Oh, no, I don't do that. You guys ready?
So where were we last time? Were we on Miss
Yes,
Dura?
story.
Dr. Dura, I'm sorry.
So I already finished, or did you
finish?
to read?
No, you can. I have to have it.
Okay.
Are we done?
No,
Are
no.
you done?
We're moving
I'm
on.
done with my part, I think.
Okay, so we finished Troika, and I guess we were going to appreciative interviews,
Speed networking and then.
Fishbowl. At least we have to do those.
Yeah.
And then I would like to pose a few, just some very
Wicked
quick pointed
question.
questions. Yeah, wicked questions. Okay, so
And 5, 4, 3, 2.
So, Henry, we had talked about 1, 2, 4 whole as a way of iteratively, progressively going deeper into an issue or topic. And I believe we can, again, like a Lego set, add certain other liberating structures to it, and one which we've done is appreciative interviews. So I wonder if you could talk about appreciative interviews, what that looks like as a liberating structure, and how that dovetails with the 1, 2, 4 structure.
Okay. Well, the way it dovetails is that 1, 2, 4 all is part of appreciative interview. So it's sort of their structure within structure kind of thing. And so appreciative interview, the purpose of appreciative interview can be more than one thing. So one purpose could be simply to reveal success, what has worked, and share that information among people to disseminate good ideas or good practices and to build on that. So it could stop there. And another purpose going further would be to really examine those successes, to make sense of them and identify what are the conditions that are essential for those to take place in order to build that into some project moving forward. So it's again another simple and relatively short exercise, which will take 35 to 45 minutes, let's say, depending on the nature of what you are addressing. And it starts by asking people to remember a story of something successful that they have done, a success story about whatever it is that is of concern to that group. Okay? So I think yesterday we did it asking people to remember one of the most memorable learning experience that they had. It could be a success story about working with a team on a project. It could be anything that is of importance to whatever the group that is there. And so you ask people to find a partner, somebody preferably that they don't know, and in pair to share those stories. So you give them a certain amount of time, let's say 5, 7 minutes each. It can be longer, depend again what the subject is. And so one person tells the story. This is my success story. This is what I have experienced. This is what happened. And the other one is sort of interviewing and sort of digging as needed in the story to clarify what happened, when, where, how, and then to really ask questions about what made this possible. What were the conditions that made this success possible? What was different about that situation that made it so much better than the norm? Okay. And so imagine that, two people, one tells a story, the other one interviews and listen, and then switch. And then after that, you take 2 pairs, so 2 sets of partners, and ask them to get together in groups of 4. And now each one retells the story, but not his or her story, but the story that he has heard from his partner when they were in a pair. Right. And if they have come up with a name for that story, that's very nice, because it sort of captured the essence of the story. Yeah. And then, so the other 3 listen, and so as everybody listens to their story, everybody is starting to look for common conditions and patterns for the success. Okay. And so then, of course, you move to so we start with pair, that's the 2, or 1 moment of reflection to remember your thing. The 2 is in pair, share the story. 4, retell the stories. And all together now, we collect those success conditions and, you know, capture them, and that becomes kind of reference moving forward as we are engaging in this fantastic project of ours. So you can stop, you know, in between. So, you know, let's suppose you have a group of salesmen, you know, you could stop at, you know, sharing the stories and then sharing some of them with the whole group. So you could go share stories in pair, and then, you know, which stories have you heard that was really special that you would like to share with the whole group, and you could, you know, or you could actually stop with a pair sharing stories as a way of kicking off a meeting and generating a lot of, you know, positive energy and a lot of sharing between people. Or of course you could move and do like we do with the speed networking. You know, you could get people in some other configuration sharing stories. Okay. So that's the basic and some variation. But and so if you do that in about 35 to 45 minutes, you have extracted from this community of people, essentially, you know, the essence of what is required to be successful in addressing whatever it is that was of importance to them, which is a pretty amazing experience, usually without any arguments at all, So
without any data, because here the stories are the data.
The stories are the data,
In some ways, Henry, returning back to our discussion of creative destruction, in which you basically pose the question, how are we going to create a situation so that you know, things will fail, and you know, then you generate a list, and then you use that list as a way of saying, gee, you know, what are we doing now? Which when you do appreciative interviews and pattern recognition, and then list the conditions for success, in some ways it's a mirror image. Conceptual mirror image of you know, what are the things that have worked, how can we in the practices that we do bring in some of these elements.
And you hope in some way that by focusing on the success conditions and really paying attention to that and making sure they are there, you are automatically
removing
the things that shouldn't be there. You know? But you could very easily see a situation where you might want to do both exercises.
Exactly. You're coming at it from different ways.
things. Just, you know.
Right.
Yeah. Absolutely. And so there again, you know, you have a very simple structure that does not impose anything in terms of the content, other than the question. It's just, you know, it's a story, number one, not a presentation, and number two, it's about something that has worked very well. That has been. That's all, and then the rest is provided by all the participants. And of course, when you ask a group of people of whatever size to get together in pairs and tell stories, this is participation, this is engagement at its best. I mean, this is real.
And it doesn't take more time. It takes exactly, whether you have 4 people or you have 400, it takes exactly the same time in terms of telling the story.
And everybody gets the same amount of time.
Precisely. Now it may take a little bit more time for harnessing, but you know, that's harnessing of ideas, so there's value in that.
And the related thing was this, which is, I think, one of my favorite things that we have to say, you know, this notion of looking for patterns by collecting data and, you know, in the form of stories, because that's the way you can get data in the easiest way, you know, and using our talent for identifying, for recognizing, for hearing. Oh, I heard this here and I heard that there. It's the same, you know, same condition, same, you know. it repeats itself, you know. And, you know, and a lot of those things are in fact very simple and easily forgotten, you know, like, I mean, the most classic thing is every time you ask for stories that involve, at some point or the other, a group of people working together, one of the success condition that you're going to find, one of the, inevitably, is somebody will say, well, we had a common purpose. Obvious, right? I mean, everybody knows that. Okay. Well,
Yeah, we were all invested in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
go to meetings and tell me how many meetings are such that really the topic that is discussed, you know, there is a clear common purpose for the participants. You know? So those basic things that are known are not. But when you have a whole group that sort of discover or rediscovers this together and says, yeah, this is, you know, this is not some guru that has, you know, produced a poster that is on the wall of every conference room about the things you have to do to have a good meeting. You know, this is us. We have put this together. It comes from us, from our stories. You know, this is our list. We own it. And now we have to decide what we're going to do with this thing. Okay. You have a very different situation. Okay. Because you could have given the task to a task force. You know, you appoint 3 people and you tell them, okay, go out and study
Collect
the
all the data.
literature and do
Right.
research and come back in a month with a, you know, recommendation about, you know. And those things exist. I mean, they are, you know, I go into meeting rooms and I see those posters, you know. This is what you have to do to have a good meeting. Well, you know, I don't agree with many of the things on that list. But, it's like, you know, this is what you have to do to have a good class.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. I mean, you could appoint a task force to
figure out.
produce, you know.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
good luck. See how long it takes before you can get it approved by the president of the university. You know, 3 months, 6 months.
And they may appoint another task force.
How many layers does it have to go back and forth and so on?
Yeah.
There, 35 minutes, 45 minutes.
Good. So, a fishbowl. We admire, you know, fishes in a fishbowl. Fishes, fish. Fishes, fish, okay. It's a safe container, a safe space, but everybody's watching, everybody can listen. So when would we use the liberating structure that we commonly refer to as a fishbowl? And what is a fishbowl in terms of a large group setting?
Okay, I'll talk about this, you know, the simple thing, because there's so many variations there again. So I think in the simplest situation and the easiest one, it is used for the purpose of a small group of people sharing information or experiences that they have with a large group of people. So the small group are the fishes that are in the bowl, who are talking to each other and, you know, sharing stories or whatever. Yeah. And the others are the people that are watching the fishes in the bowl. And so typically, so I'll give you a tangible example. For instance, something that happened to be there when it was done, very straightforward. I was somewhere where they had a pilot project. You know, they had to have developed a whole new hardware and software to give to their entire sales organization. You know. But before rolling it out and giving it to anybody, they took a certain number of people to go out and play with the thing in the field and get the bugs out of it and see how it works and so forth and so forth. And so those people went out and used it for a couple of months. And so here now they had this annual conference, and they were gonna, you know, spread it out. So the normal thing would have been for the project manager to go and interview all the people who have used this and produce a report and turn that into, you know, presentation to management, and then turn it into a PowerPoint presentation that would be presented to a whole sales force. Okay, that would have, with rehearsals and all this kind of thing. So there was then instead, was to bring a half a dozen, I think it was 6 or 7 of those, the ones that were involved in the pilot project, put them in the middle of the room, a fishbowl, therefore, you know, and all the other salespeople around in the room, and to ask them and give them 2 microphones and ask them, tell us what happened. You know, the good, the bad, what you like, what you didn't like, how it happened, the glitches, etc. Everything unloaded. Okay. And the only thing we ask you is, you know, try to turn it into a conversation. So don't have one person gets a 15-minute report and then you know, just, you know, talk about it, share stories, whatever. And so this is what happened. It was quite interesting because for the first 2 or 3 minutes it was a little awkward because, you know, they were kind of conscious that, and then little by little the thing started getting more animated. This is not what happened to me. Here's what I did, and it was really, it was like, you know, as we were trying to do yesterday, it was as if they were in a bar, you know, sharing story, yeah, and there was nobody around, you know, and it felt totally natural and authentic. And so this went on without anybody interfering, you know, at all. No project manager, no sales manager, nobody. So everybody was out around. And then at some point it finished by itself. So there was no time that had been prescribed. It just finished. You know, it took, I think, 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And then, okay.
When it's over, it's
over.
over.
We're done. No more, nothing more to say. So then it was turned to the audience around, questions. And so the questions came, and now those are questions that are peer-to-peer.
Right.
There is no filter. There is no project manager. So the level of confidence and trust is totally different than what you would have had if somebody had given a presentation. And that, again, that went on, and then at some point there were no more questions, so it took maybe 10 minutes, and 30 minutes, it was over. You know. Now, the interesting thing about it, you know, is that we asked, and we looked what was going on. I was an observer there, you know, so we asked her, so how did it go? And everybody thought this was fantastic. So there had been no preparation, no time whatsoever. People just came, and we thought, you know, we're going to tell the story, that's it. Okay. No rehearsal, no 57 spare slides, you know, no review, no nothing. You know, it was done, so all this time waste had been eliminated. So then the funny thing that happened was that this group was, I think, 60, 70, 80 or something. And there was a second meeting shortly after that with a much larger group. You know? And I was asked, well, can we do the same thing? You know, with so many more people, how much longer is it going to take?
Go ahead.
I have no idea. You know, you have to decide whether you want to do it or not. You know, are you happy the first one, and do you want to take the risk or not take the risk? I mean, I don't know. And so they decided to take the risk. Their plan. And the reason I'm telling you that story is because something happened which I didn't know and which is interesting. Is that, first of all, they had more people in the circle. So instead of, you know, 6, maybe it was 8 or 9 because there were people from the other group, so they had to include, you know, the usual thing. Okay. And so there was a concern about that. And then there were many more people. So the intriguing thing is that when they did it, the conversation in the circle, the sharing of stories, took exactly the same amount of time.
It was saturation. some point?
Absolutely. It
Yeah.
was, there wasn't more,
Mm.
you know. So what dictated the time was the content.
Mhm.
It just by itself. Okay? And it was the same thing with the second part.
Mhm.
It was again,
In
to
10
the
minutes.
minutes, pretty much the same, you know, as a completely uncontrolled process. You know.
So what does that tell you about the fishbowl, that it took exactly the same amount of time?
Well, it tells me that, you know, it made it possible without imposed constraint to allow whatever needed to happen. Yeah. That's what they needed, that group of people. Yeah. That was the competence, that was the experience to share, and those were the questions to ask. Yeah. Yeah. And from the moment that you have created that setting, you know, and where obviously you're not going to have 6 people ask the same questions because they're all together. You know.
Yeah.
There is a limited number of valid questions that can come after this has been unloaded. This is all the data. Okay. Yeah. And for me, this was kind of a bit of a revelation, you know, because it showed us that we were thinking in terms of a parameter that was not the right one. We were thinking, you know, if there are that many more people, it's going to take that much more time.
Yeah.
You know, there's this sort of simplistic linear
Right.
kind of.
Were there more ideas with, no.
No.
So in essence, one didn't need 8 presentations.
Well, it wasn't because it, you know,
Yeah.
they contributed different things.
Of course,
You know.
of course, yeah.
But it was,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
in the traditional mode, you probably would have had 8 different presentations, 8 different Q&As.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And, you know, and you think that, gee,
Yeah.
now we really have covered
the
all
one
the
thing,
spots.
the one thing that did change is because you had more people in the fishbowl, each one of them that was in, those that were in the previous bowl, that were in the second one, said less because some of the pieces were picked up by somebody
Yeah,
else.
okay.
So they didn't have, because the only rule was don't repeat yourself.
Got it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so somebody that might have said, you know, well, one of the things that happened to me is this, didn't say it because somebody else had said it. So it got distributed
Got it.
more. But that was,
Yeah.
so this is an example of a very simple, traditional way of using a fishbowl. And something that is very easy to set up because you don't need to do anything. I mean, you just do it in the moment. There is no preparation needed,
Right.
provided people are willing to participate, of course. you know.
And it comes from the horse's mouth.
Yeah, and that, I think that's a very important
Yeah.
aspect of it, that this is a way to really get horizontal information and to have a level therefore of trust in the validity of it that is completely different than what you can achieve with a presentation. Because
No
with a
filters.
presentation, everybody is listening, they say, what are they trying to sell me?
Mhm.
You know, what are they trying to convince me of? What is, you know,
Okay.
what is it that they're not telling me?
Mhm.
Okay. And we're there, you have cut the middleman, basically. Yeah. And so there are many variations, but
Yeah.
I mean, one of them is one simple one is to have an empty chair, you know, so that anybody can come and join. But so that's
The fishbowl.
you have you used it?
I think I've tried it, but it might be a little bit too much of a variation, in the sense that I combine role playing.
Yeah, that's improv then. Now you're into improv.
But I had the structure in the sort of the inner circle, and so I don't think that would be a good example to talk about fishbowl. But I keep thinking about what we did at the Anne Rogers mentorship.
We used a fishbowl, I can't remember the exact details, but the thinking was that why don't we invite a few people to sit in the center who had an opportunity to work with Ev in his early years, sort of the elder mentees. And given Ev had a long teaching career, for those who are studying his textbooks now, he is very far removed.
Yeah.
So you put 4 or 5 people who are seniors, but still mentees of Ev Rogers, who could bring in insights about his teaching, his research, his persona, his methods, and then of course all of us are sitting around and saying, oh yeah, yes, oh, and yeah, and so on. So I think it was also in some ways, it gave them respect, it gave them visibility, it focuses and directs attention to the unique perspective that they may bring by virtue of who they are. So it does confer some visibility, obviously, because you're under a gaze, but it also then allows the wisdom that may be vested in within that fishbowl to emerge, to be shared.
Yeah. So this, it's a good thing that you mentioned this, because one other thing that we should say, which is important, and it's illustrated here, is that the decision to use a particular structure for anything starts with talking about what is the purpose here, and not my purpose, but what is the purpose for the participants? What is it that we are trying to do for the people that are in the room? We are doing this in order for them to what? Okay. And so when if we look at the descriptions I've given you about that sales organization, the one you mentioned here, you're talking about 2 rather different kind of purposes. Okay. And that first one, it was clearly a sharing of information, very practical experience that those people need in order to decide that yes, we're going to use this product. So it's sort of a very very clear kind of a thing. In your case, it's more much more qualitative, and so you can see how you can use sort of the same structure to achieve rather different purposes. Or what you were describing made me think of what we call a celebrity interview, where we engage 2 or 3 people in a conversation, which can then be either in the center of the room or on a stage, on a little podium, which you have seen.
I have
been, and you probably have been in some of those.
I probably have. Yes.
So that becomes which one do we like best? Which room are we in? How many people are there? What's going to work better? And that kind of thing. And do we want them alone, or do we want a moderator, and that kind of thing, and so forth. But
Lucia, you facilitated the fishbowl yesterday, and you had a lot to share. Do you want to add a few comments on that before?
Was it the first time that in a large group, Dr. Dura, you had facilitated a fishbowl? So I wonder if you can talk about how was the experience for you?
It was the first time in a group period that I had facilitated a fishbowl. I had participated inside a fishbowl, and I had participated on the observers side of the fishbowl. So yesterday I acted both as a facilitator and as a participant. And so it was an interesting position to be in, because we tried to have a conversation as if we were in a bar.
Right.
That was the setting was, let's just pretend we have gotten to the bar and we're relaxing, we're having a drink, and so the question was, what do you think of liberating structures? what has been your experience with liberating structures? And it was 4 of us in the fishbowl who had recently been students or were students at this time. And I think it was a very loose opening. It was that was the invitation, and we started going around and passing the microphone and sharing our experiences. And I don't know for how many minutes we went on. I don't know what.
In total? It
Well,
was
for
at
the inner circle.
the I think it was about 15.
Yeah, I
Which
think
was,
so.
remember we were trying to guess?
Right, about 15.
Yeah.
So it was about 15 minutes, and at one point within those 15 minutes, I think Henry said, "Tell a story." Whispered, yes. He just gave me a little clue of asked them to tell a story. So the reason I'm talking about this is that after we had concluded the inner circle portion, and then we went out into the outer circle and got questions from observers, and there were a few questions.
Yeah, there were quite a few.
There was a lot of energy
Mhm.
that was generated from this.
Mhm.
Some of the questions were tough, I think,
Which made your life easy?
and so some of them were tough, some of them were really intriguing, and I think overall it was a good experience. It was great to get feedback from Henry, because what he said, the reason he whispered the stories, I think, is that the facilitator is in a position to narrow the focus of the conversation and to make experiences that are shared, well, more concrete.
Mhm.
And
Descriptive is the data,
yes,
not just the abstract.
which will result in a different outcome for the observers, or with the observers. So that's what I learned yesterday, that the facilitator has that, is in that position to be able to do that. Now, it's perfectly feasible to be a facilitator and a participant. I think for me yesterday, it would have been easier to do one or the other. Because as I was inside the circle, I was both trying to think of experiences and then trying to think of what should I be doing as a facilitator. So it was a little, as a first experience,
Yeah.
I think maybe next time I'll get more comfortable with the facilitation
Yes.
part of it.
Just
So,
think about
Yeah.
what kind of stories you can tell, but also drawing connections
Yeah.
between.
also,
Yeah, because it really starts going when it turns into a conversation, and people just
Yeah.
forget that there is anybody around, and just sort of become, like what we're doing, it becomes
Yeah.
totally
Right,
natural.
exactly.
You're not,
Yeah.
So the dual role was hard for me to manage because I had so much going on in my mind about both things and about the jitters.
I think, but regardless of your role, if you're the fish in the inner circle, I remember when we finally sort of got this casual conversational atmosphere sort of, emerged and going, and started talking about how effective, how exciting it can be. At one point, after a while, we were commenting for a while, and I felt that I started to be aware that we're just saying only very positive things, but not giving enough details
Tangible.
very tangible details. And I remember I was so conscious about, I realized, maybe we know what we're talking about, and it does excite people sitting in the outer circle, but not necessarily telling them what exactly happened to make it so exciting. So my point here is, to be the fish in the bowl, you have to have that kind of level of consciousness that in the stories we're telling and sharing, you have to have that where, when, what, how, and all of that, rather than only saying this was great.
And that's where the facilitation makes a difference, because
ask the
depending
questions.
on, and so again, depending on what the nature of what it is that you're dealing with, this becomes almost not necessary at all. Like, the story that I was telling you, I mean, people were totally factual there. know.
Mhm.
There was no,
Interpretation.
here's what happened, you know.
Uh-huh.
Mhm.
I tried to send this and it didn't work and I got this glitch and I went, I lost 2 days. I mean, this was very, very nuts and bolts kind of thing. And that was exactly what was needed, because that's the thing that people needed to hear.
So it's more or less like,
You
what did
bring
you do? And then rather than how do you feel about
We didn't
it?
have to intervene at all. Yeah, exactly. There was no, there was no intervention whatsoever in that fishbowl. But there now you're dealing with a bunch of professors, in a fishbowl. So that's a different.
But how do you speak words?
So now you move very easily into that, the more
Professors-
conceptual level.
And they sometimes have opinions, professors.
Yeah, I noticed that, yeah.
Well, I think so, and I think that, that particular, I don't know, I think of it as an idiosyncrasy, but the way of thinking of the group observing was very much like, okay, what's going on here and how is it working, and there was a computational factor and then an analysis and an output of
Right, yeah.
what just happened here or what your experience is.
Yeah.
There was we process things, we're trained,
Yeah.
so.
So the connection there that I'm making is with we were just talking about appreciative interview and sharing stories. That one of the power of that method is that you ask people to tell stories, and it's not that easy to get people to tell stories because the tendency to escape into interpretations and
Yeah.
points of view and judgment and
Yeah.
all this sort of thing, instead of staying with facts,
happened.
description, is, quite, I mean, it's, and that's a big difference, because you want to tell the story, let them interpret, let them decide, let the audience figure out what they think this information means,
So Henry, in terms of process and the design of a certain process, how important are instructions and
Well,
knowing beforehand the
they-
questions that are going to go with
They
the
are,
structure?
but you can have instruction,
Mhm.
you can have volumes of instruction. Those things, those structures are simple enough that you need the instructions to get started, and then you need to set up a process for learning that includes, partnering, observer, feedback, and all those kind of things like what we are talking about. You will discover it by yourself if you have enough eyes and enough of a bit of a community of people sharing experiences and story. You don't need an expert to point this out. You'll find out. You are all smart enough for that, but you need some kind of a process for doing that, because if you do it alone, you can't do it and observe yourself at the same time unless you have a camera and then you can replay the video.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and it's this, and you can use liberating structure to liberate yourself from experts. You don't need experts.
From
You need-
yourself.
You are the experts. If
Yeah.
you work as a community and tap into that, you have all the expertise that you need, and particularly in an environment like this one where you have huge diversity of field of expertise and personalities and this and that. I mean, you'll figure it out.
Yeah, I do feel, starting with the basics, knowing the specific steps, then once you practice, you realize some of the details are more important than others. Like, you would be more aware of how big the room is, whether you could, how you deal with the chairs, the space, and if you use the bell, you're standing in the middle of the room, or you're using your cell phone timing and assigning roles. So I think the more you practice, the more you realize
Yeah.
some of those
Particularly
things.
if you systematically debrief. So if you do, if you take, like the experience you're describing, you take the fishbowl, okay? If the four of you can take the time when it's over or later in the day to do a debrief And if in addition to that, you can invite a couple of people that were looking at it from outside, you will find everything you need to find, and if not, you'll find it the next time around. Okay?
Right.
So you don't need the expert. Yeah. Each one of you alone will maybe not, but together, no question.
That's exactly how I felt about, how I worked with my students to come up with the structure for the syllabus. Working on the observations. I mean, it was a little bit challenging for them to focus on just the observations to start with, and then to look at patterns and make sense, and then, sort of the next step, that kind of the letter of inference.
Inference,
The letter of inference.
It's a good way of presenting information too, by the way.
Right.
To present it in terms, okay, here's the data, here's what happened, and here's,
This is what it means.
here's what it means to me, or the conclusion that I drew from it, and this is, that's why I'm saying this, about it, And it's quite helpful, simple framework,
Could we talk a little bit about speed networking, which some people have appropriated as speed dating?
It started as that, actually. I don't know if you remember that in the early days.
That's how it started. as
Yeah,
speed
and
dating.
then Keith wanted something that sounded more professional,
That guy Keith took the fun out of.
No, it's okay. We are. So it comes back once in a while. How's it?
So is that something that we can talk a little bit about? That's an activity that we started with yesterday.
Yeah.
And what is speed networking? Why would one employ it? What's the nature of the structure? What does it do? It's fun because dating, and that to speed dating, sounds like fun.
So you want me to? Do you want somebody else to describe
I think, Kevin,
it?
you should.
So it is a very simple process. We use it routinely when we do a workshop to start the workshop. And I say this to preface the thing, but also to say there is a tendency because of that of people to assume that it should be used to start. It doesn't have to. It can be used anytime. But let me describe what we do when we use it, like to start. Okay. So this is one of those standing up structure. Remembering that the people who cannot stand up, which I have to say escaped me yesterday. I'll admit it. Probably because I'm assuming that people will automatically adjust, which is what happened actually,
Right.
what they did. But,
You can sit down with somebody who
Yeah.
wants to sit down.
So we ask people to stand up and then go and find somebody, preferably that they don't know, or somebody that they're not routinely spending time with. And we give each one about 2 minutes, so 2 minutes per person, and we give people a couple of questions that have to be relevant to them, otherwise it wouldn't work. And so a classic, for instance, that we've used many times, which is sort of a bit of a generic thing, we would ask the first question would be, what is your biggest professional challenge, for instance? And the second question will be, what do you hope to get from this workshop and to contribute, So, and of course you can vary that. So each person has 2 minutes to give their answer to those 2 questions. So it's one person talks, the other one listens, and maybe asks questions, and then 2 minutes for the other one. So it's not a conversation. That's what we try to suggest. We don't control that, but very often it goes in different directions in that respect. But that's where. And so after 4 minutes, we ring a bell and we tell people go and find somebody else. Same 2 questions. Maybe the same time, maybe a little less time, depending on the crowd, and then same thing a 3rd time. So it's 3 rounds of 3 to 4 minutes, or 3 to 5, depending on the situation. And then that's it. And after that, you have variation. You can ask what happened, you can ask for, did anything come up that was important, any observation, or you can stop there and move on to your next thing. So when we do this in our workshop, we purposely do this immediately after the people have arrived, and we purposely avoid any introductions, any speech other than the absolute minimum. Like, my name is this, and my name is this, and this is a workshop on the learning structure, and we're going to start immediately with one experience, with liberating structure, and we plunge into it. And we do this purposely in order to be able to invite people afterwards to contrast how that experience was versus what is the norm. And the norm is that you come into whatever gathering of some importance, and the first thing, somebody stands up and gives a speech or presents something or introduces with all the flourishes and so forth. And this is the norm. Okay? And so this gives people the opportunity to immediately appreciate how a very simple structure can, with no effort at all, immediately engage everybody and get everybody to participate and start taking some piece of ownership about this meeting, this gathering, because you're asking them, what is your, so you invite everybody to talk about themselves, and about what matters to them, okay? So you're telling them this is your meeting, even though you're not telling them anything. But by that action, you have invited them to feel like that.
And they also get to know a few people.
That's the next aspect of it, and that's why it can be used in so many other situations, is that inevitably, when you ask people to go out and talk to people that they don't know, or people that they don't spend time with, you're creating what we call new connection and loose connections. And it is by meeting other people that are outside your normal circle that you open up entry to whole new circles and communities and individuals. And it almost never happens when we have a group of people of some size that there's not at least one connection that is created there that does not end up becoming something significant for somebody in that group. So,
Is there a reason there are two questions in this activity instead of one?
you don't have to have two questions. But if you think of it in the way this was used in the beginning of the workshop, those questions make sense. So if you think, I mean, normally people would come to something that they have some sense of what, this has been organized for, and so if they are there, they're hoping, and it's very important to capture that for themselves to start with, because people are not necessarily clear about it.
Right.
And the opportunity that you give them to sort of think about it 3 times and listen to what others have to say, really starts grounding the thing. And of course, if you want to, you can collect some of this information as a way of making sure that what people are expecting will be addressed, in order to make some effort to make this meeting or workshop, whatever, relevant to them. And so it can be used in any number of different ways, and it can be used in the middle of a meeting with a question that is appropriate to what is going on right now, it could be as simple as, where are we now, or whatever.
Where do we need to go?
Yeah, where we need to go, and I mean, you can, so it's also energizing because you're standing up,
Right.
and when you have a meeting or when you have a class, people need to move periodically.
everybody has to be part of it, which I think.
Yeah.
Because I remember when I used speed networking as an icebreaker to start my class, the undergraduate class. And what I did is I sort of divided the responsibilities between myself and my TA. And I had her, sort of handing out markers and name tags so people, when the students walked in, they could put their name on the tag. And we will help them to make the room, the open space in the classroom. But usually when students walk into a classroom, all they do is to grab a chair, sit down, look on their cell phone or on their computer screen and just to mind their own stuff. But here, you basically have to stand up, help, and then once we got started, I remember, this was the beginning of a class, and I sensed that they were not so motivated. Like, this is a required communication class, oh boy, there's a new semester, I'm still in the mode of summer vacation, coming back to school, and, they're not really up for, and so being able to engage them in just basically 12 minutes, taking turns, and they got to know 3, other people who are not their friends, and they basically made new friends. I asked them the 2 questions I had one was their biggest accomplishment in the last year. So they got to reflect upon their academic school life, and then what they would expect to get out of this class, even though they may not be so interested at that point, at least it got them thinking, talking about it.
Yeah, well, why am I here?
Right, and one observation I had was they had each 2 minutes. Each of them had 2 minutes, and the first round they pretty much stopped at 1 minute because they're not used to thinking about things very deeply or even think about it, right? They're used to give me the order, give me the assignment. I'm gonna go home, before it's due, like the night, and I'm gonna do it, right?
Are we gonna get off early today because this is the first day?
Right, and then, but then I realized from the second round on, they had more to say, right? So I thought it was really nice. I always use some kind of games or activities as an icebreaker, but I thought it was great the way it worked out. And later I used speed networking in my class, sort of in the middle of the semester, where I wanted to regroup the students. So they got to know at least another 3 students that they had not had a chance to interact with very much in the class, even though they are all in groups, throughout the semester. And then, because you talk in pairs, right? And then I asked 2 pairs to get together to form a group of 4. That would be your new group. So that's, I repurposed the activity, for that purpose. That worked out very well. Yeah.
And the question was, do you remember?
I don't quite remember, but it's of course related to the course and how they felt about it or something like that.
So it's interesting that in that first speed networking, the first question was an appreciative question, as opposed to the example I gave you, which was asking, what's your biggest challenge? Or
anxiety.
yesterday we used we had this anxious, what are you most anxious about? And so using different things like that, you kind of learn what happens if you do that versus that and so forth.
That was a deliberate decision. I mean, coming back to school, it
Which
can
is,
be overwhelming, like with all these different things going on. I wanted them to feel positive, right? It's to start positive. And so I think that worked out very well.
All right. Wait, I need something to take.
All right, we will just wind up in the next 5 minutes. And here's a suggestion.
Did I?
Which is great. Structures because,
Okay.
and if you wish, you can even add, my.
Say record.
Record.
Everybody ready?
Yes.
All right, and in 5, 4, 3, 2.
So I think I am excited about liberating structures because I know for sure something wonderful will emerge, and I'm just curious how meaningful experiences will come out of this whole process. That you're bringing value to people's lives and to your own life as well.
Go ahead.
I am excited about liberating structures for many reasons, but primarily because it's a small thing that you can do which can make a very big difference in the way class is conducted, in the way the outcomes emerge, and that's very exciting for me.
I'm excited about liberating structures because I'm ready to see the surprises in the group. I'm ready to see what kind of energy is unleashed and what kind of knowledge comes up from us together rather than the weight being on me.
Well, I am excited, first of all, because you are excited. And that's the most rewarding thing that can happen. And that's what keeps me going, and Keith as well. And that we're getting so much positive feedback. But on the more tangible level, I feel, as you do, Arvin, that the thing that is exciting about it, liberating structures, is they're a small thing, they're simple, they're uncomplicated, but they're a fantastic way to include everybody in whatever needs to be done, and therefore generate outcomes that are totally different than what otherwise would be the case, whatever it is that people are engaged into. And what's exciting is that liberating structures scale, and meaning by that if you use just one of them, it's good enough to transform just a small working session or a little meeting. But if you start using more of them in a large group, you can transform a whole organization. And it's not culture specific because it's just a structure. And so it works in Brazil, it works in the States, it works in France, it works with Swedes or Spaniards and so forth. And it is not subject specific either because it's just a structure. So it doesn't matter whether you're dealing with one domain or another, for-profit, non-profit, government, science, non-science, qualitative, quantitative, it doesn't matter. The moment people have to do something together, it can make a difference. So it's pretty good as far as I'm concerned. I feel pretty good.
All right, me too. We can go another round if you want, because it's additional fodder for Bobby,
Yeah.
if you wish. Yeah, if you wish to, or you can pass. You can put it on me, if you wish. I am excited about liberating structures because liberating structures are about learning how to learn. And we often take learning or a certain way of teaching as given. Here there is some thought which is implemented in order for people to learn how to learn with outcomes that are relational, content-oriented, and substantive.
come?
From a place inside.
I had something and then it went, "Pfft,"
I know.
and I don't know where it is anymore.
Okay.
I have a few words, not a sentence. And,
I think I have one.
okay,
Thank
I'll
you.
start. So, I'm excited about liberating structures because, you know, you have very simple step-by-step, you know, instructions and methods you could start with and to experiment with the group you're working with and see what kind of difference it can make.
Should I? So I'm a couple of more reasons why I'm excited. One of them is because what I've seen personally, what I've experienced personally, is that people are looking for something. People are bored in meetings, they are bored in classrooms, they are frustrated, they feel excluded, they feel that, you know, they're not offered the opportunity to contribute their views, their opinions, and so forth. And that is everywhere, to varying degrees, but it is everywhere, without any exception. And those structures offer the opportunity to change that very simply. And what makes this possible is that they are simple enough that everybody can learn them. You don't need an expert, you don't need a consultant, you don't need an outsider, you don't need a facilitator. Every single person in the organization can learn those things and use them. And so if we're thinking about here an academic environment, every professor can learn that. Every TA can learn that. Every student can learn that. So that if they do that, because they use them in their class and use them themselves, they will go out in their work life with a whole toolkit of things that they can use in their professional career. So that's exciting.
Okay. It's because you made me listen to you.
Settle down.
Okay. I'm excited about the prospect of having access to liberating structures that will help me optimize the energy and the knowledge in the room where I'm working. And I'm also excited about what I will get out of the process in terms of thinking a little bit differently and looking at problems from a different perspective, from a fresh perspective, and being able to hone in on issues of purpose and problem solving and creativity from a different angle.
I have one more.
You have 4 more?
One.
I have one more too.
Oh, keep going. Oh.
I'm excited about liberating structures because
Because
What is he hinting?
did I say the wrong sentence?
how's it looking? Yeah? The angle is good. Yeah. Okay. Let's go to hell.
Trying to put it together as one complete
You lost me
sentence
there.
I lost myself. How was
Okay.
it? Did my voice come through well?
Oh, so it doesn't just happen to me.
Oh.
So I'm excited because I know that my students and I together can create a safe space for a learning journey. What was the second part? Oh, so we're actually, quality face-to-face time together that could be best used for the class.
You're so forgetful. What happened there? Yeah.
So
Should we jump?
I'll add something.
Gosh.
And then it's my turn.
One,
Yes, we're coming back to you.
one of the reasons why I'm excited about liberating structure is on a more personal level. There is practically no situation that I find myself in that I can think of on the, day after day after day, no conversation where one or the other structure or element of structure does not come to inspire me to do something different, just regular conversation. In the car, driving, you're sharing a story about a conversation you had, and we started talking about 15%, and it was very helpful. And it's like that all the time. And it's very enjoyable. It makes me smile. It's fun. It's intellectually also very, not just emotionally but intellectually also very rewarding.
I feel like I'm a
Like
pop.
playing with a bunch of things, it kind of like.
Arvind, did you have something you were going to say?
Yeah, and you didn't get it, so I'll. May I have your permission to roll? I am excited about liberating structures because as a professor, it liberates me. Because I'm now not completely, totally, fully responsible for the teaching, learning, sharing that happens. So by letting go, and if professors can let go a little more, we can let come. Wow, Sindel, you're good.
I am excited
That
to
was
let
like-
go.
Love it.
Did you get that? We're going to do a series?
No,
I'm ready to
hey,
let
I
go.
do things on the first take. I don't need to worry about it.
Feels good to let go.
It
Yeah.
feels good.
So
Let go.
I am ready to become excited, but not ready to celebrate because of the possibility that UTEP will bring those ideas and practical tools into the university at a scale that could really make a difference for UTEP. And if that happens, then I will be ready to be excited.
And it'll begin with a few, or maybe it's already begun with a few. And it'll take time, but I guess the invitation is open and extended to one and all. This is Walter Cronkite signing off
Very good.
in the CBS News studios in New York.
And you should say, as your sign off line, let go and let come.
Let go and let come.
Look at him, look at us.
Hey, thank you guys. You guys are
Thank
great.
you so much.
Steve, what's your full name?
Stephen Reyes.
Stephen Reyes, you're the
Yes.
man. D'Angelo.
Freeman.
Freeman.